I'm Amanda, a 32-year-old nurse, married to John for 5 years. We met in college when he was studying to be a doctor, and I was training to be a nurse. We started dating at a party, then got married. John is dedicated to becoming a doctor, but he's faced setbacks. He's failed his medical licensing exam twice and took 3 years off. Right now, he's working part-time and studying hard to pass, while I'm working full-time as a nurse to support us. He doesn't care about showing off wealth, like those who post photos of fancy cars online. Instead, he reads stories about people who lost loved ones to illness, keeps up with public health news, and studies Japan's healthcare system. I admire him because he genuinely wants to be a doctor to help people. Even though he's not a doctor yet and doesn't make much money, I've stayed by his side. John hasn't told his parents that he hasn't passed his exam yet. He says, "My mom's too nosy," and I reassure him, "I support you, so don't worry about them. This is just temporary." John works night shifts as a security guard at the hospital where I work. He has some medical knowledge from his studies, so he can talk like a doctor, and no one suspects he's still working toward his license. Even his family thinks he's a doctor because he sounds knowledgeable and is technically employed at the hospital. My mother-in-law, however, is harsh and very different from my husband. She has a strong personality and often looks down on me because I'm just a nurse. She thinks her son deserves someone better, maybe a beautiful doctor from dermatology. After she saw a pay stub, which actually wasn't mine, she made rude comments. She scoffed. Only earning $750 a month is like a college student's allowance. Even students working at bars make more. Having a low-income wife is a disgrace. Maybe you should divorce so our son can find a better wife. He's the ultimate triple threat. After all, her judgmental attitude makes it hard for me, but I choose to support John through his challenges, even though his mom doesn't think I'm good enough for him. Whenever my mother-in-law makes these rude comments, I just bow my head and apologize. I fully support my husband's goal of becoming a doctor, but at this point, he's only a high school graduate with a lot of medical knowledge, working part-time, not even a medical intern yet. Still, he's always genuinely grateful, often telling me, "Thank you for everything," so I continue to support him quietly. I'm busy with work, too, and even with both our incomes, we're barely managing financially, but I never cared much about money when I chose this career. I became a nurse because I admired Florence Nightingale and wanted to help people. Now, I work in internal medicine, one of the most demanding fields, and I don't think about money much. As long as we have enough to live, eat, and stay healthy, that's enough for me. Even though I'm supporting us both, covering his living expenses and school fees, my mother-in-law still brags to the neighbors, saying, "My son's a doctor and earns well." If he were already a real doctor, he wouldn't want her showing off about his income anyway, but she doesn't care. She just talks about money all the time. As her son, he has to put up with it silently. She has no idea that he's actually working as a security guard in a hospital uniform, not walking around in a white coat like she brags about. And even if he were, that's not something to go around gossiping about. I understand her pride, but she should keep it in check. I worry about my husband's mental health, as this pressure could hurt his chances of passing his medical exam. He's so close to becoming a doctor, and it would be sad if he had to spend his whole life as a security guard after working so hard. Honestly, he's well suited to being a doctor. He's thoughtful and kind. His only flaw might be his gentle nature. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law keeps going around making wild claims, saying things like, "My son makes $373,000 a year," knowing how false that is only adds more pressure on him. One time, I gently told my mother-in-law, "I think it might be better for his patients if you didn't talk so much about John's job. It could cause problems. After all, would you want to see a doctor whose mother is always bragging about him when you're sick?" She didn't care. She snapped back, "Shut up, you're just a nurse. You should be grateful you even got to marry a doctor. It's luckier than winning $3 million. Money can't buy status, you nursing school graduate." She often threw insults like that at me. I just replied politely, "Yes, I'm sorry, thank you for letting me marry John. I respect him as a doctor and as a person, so please, just leave him alone." She scoffed, "You're so annoying. We can still make him divorce you and find someone better. It would be awful if our grandchild inherited your low IQ." Her words were beyond rude, almost a violation of my rights, but I stayed quiet. Compared to the importance of my job, helping patients, her mean comments seemed small, so I didn't take her seriously. Still, this attitude continued, and then one day, something unexpected happened. My in-laws live about 30 minutes away by train, so we don't visit much, and with my busy work schedule, I don't see them often. This distance helped keep up the lie that John is already a doctor, but for whatever reason, maybe she was bored or impatient, my mother-in-law suddenly showed up at our house unannounced. She looked around and sneered, "What a cramped house. Why does my amazing son have to live in such a poor place?" As she looked at a row of medical books on our shelf, she narrowed her eyes and muttered, "Well, he is my son after all," then snapped a photo with her phone. I felt a bit nervous because most of the books were for the national medical exam, including the ones for this year, which could give away that he's still a student. I felt my heart racing, but I did my best to stay calm and not let my mother-in-law see my anxiety. I apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, we're both very busy with work, so we haven't had time to look for a bigger place, especially lately." I hoped she'd take the hint to go home. Instead, she started going through our things. "What's with these cheap dishes?" she scoffed. "If you're a doctor, you should be buying Wedgwood." "Yes, I'm sorry," I replied, "they're from the dollar store." "Dollar store? I'm throwing these away," she said, ignoring me. I tried to explain that we were cutting costs on non-essentials like dishes, because we were putting our money toward John's textbooks and tuition. As long as the plates could serve food, that was good enough for us. Right now, passing the medical exam was our priority. Luckily, John was at work as a security guard at the hospital. I didn't want him to see this, so I hoped to get her out before he came back. But she didn't stop there. She went on to criticize everything. "These clothes look like a student's," she said, tossing out my husband's favorite shirts. "If you're a doctor, you should be wearing high-end brands." Then she found his watch. "This old thing? A doctor should have a luxury watch." She threw away his smartwatch, not realizing it was useful for his work. One by one, she tossed out his belongings, things he'd bought with the little money he had. Each item represented his hard work, his pride, and his dreams of becoming a doctor, but she didn't see that. Finally, she sneered, "This is what happens when you marry a poor girl. No wonder you live like this, even though he's a doctor." My mother-in-law looked around and sneered, "It's shocking you don't live in a luxury apartment. I was hoping we could go shopping, and maybe you'd at least buy me a designer bag." Her expectation was outrageous, so I tried to gently clarify the reality of our life. "Mother-in-law," I said, "I don't mean to be forward, but he's not extravagant. We actually like our simple lifestyle." But she didn't care. "You're so annoying. Do you know how hard he worked to get into medical school? We've been waiting to get back what we spent on his education, and it's your fault that we're still waiting." She kept getting angrier, rummaging through every part of our home, tossing out anything she thought was too cheap. Then she opened some clear cases where we kept our utility bills, mail, and other documents. That's when she found the pay stubs. They showed $750.25, clearly marked with my husband's name. Either she didn't notice or didn't read carefully, but she started yelling. $750? Are you kidding me?" she shrieked. "A nurse making only $750? That's not what a doctor should be earning. Even an anesthesiologist makes that in a day, and you call yourself a nurse? What a joke, you must barely be working." She spiraled into anger, accusing me of living off my husband's money, deceiving him, and being a part-time nurse just for show. In reality, that $750 was what he earned from his shifts as a security guard, working in the gaps between studying, enduring tough shifts, while watching younger doctors pass him by. It wasn't a lot, but every bit helped us get by. But my mother-in-law didn't stop. Her anger only grew until she finally shouted, "You're a bad luck wife. Get divorced already." Just then, the front door opened. My husband had come home from his shift. He froze when he saw his favorite clothes and his watch, tossed carelessly into a trash bag. My husband quietly began picking up his belongings that had been thrown into the trash, one by one, but my mother-in-law interrupted him. "John, I don't mean to be harsh, but you need to divorce this wife of yours. With your high education, high income, and nearly 6 foot height, why did you choose such a pathetic woman? She only earns $750. He stayed silent, his lips tightly pressed, not showing what he was feeling. My mother-in-law continued, "I'll bring the divorce papers. Leave this dusty little place and this woman who smells like disinfectant, and find a better wife. You're a doctor, after all." Finally, my husband stood up and spoke. "Mom, I've been quiet about this, but I'm not a doctor yet." She was stunned. "What are you talking about?" He explained, "I'm sorry for hiding it, but I haven't passed the national exam yet, and that $750 on the pay stub, That's my part-time job salary. My mother-in-law looked shocked and turned to me in confusion. What is he talking about? Isn't that your pay? I saw there was no point in hiding anymore. No, it's not mine, I said. He continued, it's true. I failed the national exam twice, and I've been working as a security guard. My mother-in-law, stunned by the revelation, suddenly became unsteady. As she backed up, she slipped on some newspapers she'd scattered while going through our things and fell. She didn't hit her head, but she did put out her arm to catch herself, and we heard a snap. It was a fracture. My husband and I quickly treated her and took her to the hospital. Once she was settled with an orthopedic doctor, my husband told her, Mom, I'm sorry, but please don't come to our house anymore, and don't think of me as your son anymore. She was shocked, but he continued, I tolerated your bragging, even felt guilty for lying, but insulting the money I worked hard to earn was too much. I'm not studying to brag about a salary. We have very different values, and it's best we cut ties. My mother-in-law, whose main purpose in life had been boasting about her doctor's son, was devastated. Since then, she's mostly stayed home, embarrassed to face the neighbors. Later that year, my husband passed the medical licensing exam. Though he was a bit older than the usual resident physician, he finally started working as a doctor. He worked with kindness, even bringing tea to the security guards. Our life became peaceful and happy. If my mother-in-law had just waited a few more months, she would have seen him in his white coat, fulfilling her dream, but she brought her troubles upon herself. My name is Irene, and I'm just a simple girl from a modest family. I graduated from college and started working as a nurse at City General Hospital. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved helping people and making a difference in their lives. On that fateful day, I was rushing through the emergency room, arms full of supplies, when the doors burst open. 2 paramedics wheeled in a stretcher, and on it lay a man in a torn leather jacket and shattered motorcycle helmet. What happened? I asked, immediately setting down my load and moving to assist. Rich boy on a fancy bike lost control, one of the paramedics grunted. Hit a guardrail. Lucky his gear held up, or he'd be in worse shape. Dr. Thompson, the attending physician, hurried over. Irene, I need your help here. We worked quickly, removing the man's protective gear and assessing his injuries. Despite the severity of the crash, he seemed to have escaped with only a broken arm and some nasty bruises. As we cut away his shirt, I couldn't help but notice his toned physique and the expensive watch on his wrist. Where am I? The man groaned, regaining consciousness. You're at City General, I told him softly. You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay. His eyes fluttered open, revealing startling blue irises. He looked at me, dazed, then managed a weak smile. An angel, he mumbled, before passing out again. I felt my cheeks flush and quickly busied myself with preparing his drip. Looks like you've got an admirer, Irene, Dr. Thompson chuckled. This is Jake Thornton, son of Richard Thornton. You know, the guy who owns half the city? Over the next few days, I found myself assigned to Jake's room more often than not. He was healing well, but his cocky attitude was beginning to grate on my nerves. Hey, Nurse Angel, he'd call out whenever I entered. Come to make my day brighter? I'd roll my eyes, trying to hide my blush. I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Thornton. Nothing more. Despite his arrogance, there was something about Jake that intrigued me. He was more than just a rich boy with a pretty face. When he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him reading complex financial reports or speaking fluent Mandarin on his phone. On the day of his discharge, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness. I told myself it was ridiculous, he was just another patient, and an annoying one at that. Well, Nurse Angel, Jake said as he gathered his things, I guess this is goodbye. Take care, Mr. Thornton, I replied professionally. Try to stay off motorcycles for a while. A week after Jake's discharge, I was going about my usual routine at the hospital. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was updating patient charts at the nurse's station when I heard a familiar voice. Excuse me, I'm looking for Nurse Angel. Have you seen her? I looked up, startled to see Jake Thornton standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and that cocky grin on his face. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Thornton," I said, feeling my cheeks warm. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right with your arm?" He chuckled. "Please, call me Jake. And my arm's fine, thanks to your excellent care. These are for you, by the way." He handed me the flowers. I accepted them awkwardly, aware of my coworkers' curious stares. "Thank you, but why?" "Because I'm asking you out on a date," he said bluntly. "And I'm hoping these might persuade you to say yes." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "Okay, one dinner. But that's it." Jake's face lit up. "Great. I'll pick you up at 8. Wear something nice." As he strode out of the hospital, leaving me standing there with a bouquet of expensive flowers, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, I agonized over what to wear. My closet was full of practical clothes for work, nothing suitable for a date with someone like Jake Thornton. I finally settled on a simple black dress, the only one I owned. At 8 o'clock sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside my modest apartment building. Jake stepped out, looking like he'd just walked off a magazine cover in his tailored suit. "You look beautiful," he said, his eyes appreciative as he opened the car door for me. The restaurant he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers, soft piano music, waiters in tuxedos, it was all so overwhelming. "Relax," Jake said, noticing my discomfort. "It's just dinner." But it wasn't just dinner. It was the beginning of something I never could have anticipated. As we talked, I discovered that beneath his cocky exterior, Jake was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down-to-earth. He told me about his work as a financial director in his father's company, and I found myself sharing stories about my life and my passion for nursing. "You know," Jake said as we were finishing dessert, "I've dated a lot of women, but I've never met anyone quite like you, Irene." I laughed. "I'm sure you say that to all the girls." "No," he said, his tone serious. "I mean it. You're real. Genuine. It's refreshing." As he drove me home that night, I realized that I was in dangerous territory. But when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, all my reservations melted away. And as I watched his car disappear into the night, I knew that my life was never going to be the same again. The weeks that followed were like a dream. Jake and I started dating regularly, and I found myself falling harder for him with each passing day. But reality had a way of intruding on our fairy tale. The first time Jake took me to meet his parents, I knew immediately that they disapproved of me. "So, Irene," Jake's mother, Elizabeth Thornton, said coolly, "Jake tells us you're a nurse?" I nodded, trying to hide my nervousness. "Yes, at City General." "How quaint," she replied, her tone making it clear she thought it was anything but. Jake's father, Richard, barely looked up from his newspaper. "And your family? What do they do?" "My father's a retired police officer, and my mother's a teacher," I said proudly. Elizabeth exchanged a look with her husband that spoke volumes. It was clear they thought I wasn't good enough for their son. As we left that night, Jake squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about them," he said. "They'll come around eventually." But I wasn't so sure. The disapproval of Jake's parents cast a shadow over our relationship, one that I couldn't quite shake. Despite this, Jake and I grew closer. He showered me with affection and gifts, taking me to places I'd only ever dreamed of. But I never felt comfortable in his world of wealth and privilege. I was always acutely aware of how different we were. One night, after a particularly lavish date, I confronted Jake about it. "Why me?" I asked. "You could have any woman you want. Someone from your world. Why choose a simple nurse?" Jake cupped my face in his hands. "Because you're real, Irene. You're not with me for my money or my name. You see me for who I really am." His words touched me deeply, and I pushed my doubts aside. I loved Jake, and he loved me. Wasn't that all that mattered? 6 months into our relationship, Jake proposed. It wasn't a grand, elaborate affair, just the two of us, on the rooftop of my apartment building under the stars. It was perfect. We decided on a simple ceremony, much to the dismay of Jake's parents. But Jake stood firm, insisting that it was our day, not theirs. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's beaming face, I felt like my heart might burst with happiness. This was the beginning of our forever. After the wedding, we moved into Jake's luxury apartment. It was bigger than any place I'd ever lived, with a view of the city that took my breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," Jake said, scooping me up in his arms as we crossed the threshold. I giggled, still not used to my new name. "I love you, Mr. Thornton." Married life with Jake started off beautifully. We settled into a routine in our luxurious apartment, and I continued working part-time at the hospital. A few months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed when I told him the news. "We're going to be parents," he exclaimed, spinning me around in our living room. "I can't wait to meet our little one." The pregnancy was relatively easy, and 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Lily. Jake was by my side throughout the delivery, holding my hand and encouraging me. To my surprise, Jake's parents seemed to soften a bit after Lily was born. They doted on their granddaughter, showering her with gifts and attention. However, their attitude towards me remained cool and distant. "At least you managed to give Jake an heir," Elizabeth said during one of their visits, her tone a mix of approval and condescension. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that Lily deserved to have a relationship with her grandparents, regardless of how they treated me. As the months passed, I noticed subtle changes in Jake. He started working longer hours at his father's company, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask me to prepare his suits and shine his shoes, but rarely inquired about my day or how I was feeling. One evening, as I was putting Lily to bed, Jake came home later than usual. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "Working late," he replied tersely. "There's a big merger coming up. I need to be prepared." I nodded, unconvinced. "I made dinner. It's in the fridge if you want to heat it up." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "I already ate at the office." This became our new normal. Jake would come home late, barely acknowledge me or Lily, and retreat to his home office. I tried to talk to him about it, but he always had an excuse. "I'm doing this for us, Irene," he'd say. "For our future. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. The man I married, the one who had swept me off my feet, seemed to be disappearing before my eyes. One day, I received an unexpected call from Elizabeth, Jake's mother. "Irene," she said, her voice cold and disapproving. "I hope you realize you're not fulfilling your duties as the wife of a financial director." Confused and hurt, I asked, "What do you mean?" "You didn't even bother to come to the corporate party last night," she replied. "Though perhaps it's for the best. You would have stood out among the gorgeous women there, and not in a good way." My heart sank. I hadn't known about any corporate party. Jake hadn't mentioned it to me. That evening, when Jake came home, I confronted him. "Why didn't you invite me to the corporate party?" Jake's face hardened. "Irene, let's be honest. You're too simple for those events. I'd be embarrassed to have you there." His words cut deep, confirming my worst fears. The man I loved, the one who had once called me real and genuine, now found me embarrassing. The weeks following Jake's cruel words were tense. We barely spoke. I threw myself into caring for Lily and my work at the hospital, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One evening, Jake called to say he was staying late at work again. I decided to use the quiet time to clean up a bit. As I tidied his home office, I noticed his computer was on, the screen glowing softly in the dim room. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the mouse. I knew I shouldn't, but something compelled me to look. To my surprise, the computer wasn't password protected. With a shaky hand, I opened his email. What I found shattered my world. There, in black and white, was an email exchange between Jake and a woman named Vanessa. As I read through their correspondence, my heart pounded in my chest. They weren't just co-workers, they were lovers. They mocked me, calling me a hen, a fool, a redneck without taste. Jake praised Vanessa's skills in bed, while dismissing me as dull and unattractive. With trembling hands, I copied all the correspondence I could find onto a USB drive. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Jake with. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Jake's words echoed in my mind. When he finally came home the next morning, I was waiting for him in the living room, Lily asleep in her crib. We need to talk, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I know about Vanessa. His face paled for a moment before a smirk settled on his lips. Come on, Irene. Did you really think someone like me would be satisfied with someone like you? Vanessa is everything you're not: beautiful, sophisticated, amazing in bed. Each word was like a knife to my heart. I'm your wife, I whispered. The mother of your child. And that's all you'll ever be, he sneered. I'm not giving up Vanessa. You'll just have to deal with it. In that moment, something inside me snapped. No, I said firmly. I won't deal with it. This marriage is over, Jake. His smirk faltered. You can't leave me. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own. I'd rather be poor and alone than stay with a cheating bastard like you, I spat. I rushed to Lily's room, scooped her up, and grabbed the pre-packed bag I'd prepared earlier. As I headed for the door, Jake called out. You'll regret this, Irene. I'll make sure of it. I turned to face him one last time. No, Jake. You're the one who's going to regret this. With those words, I walked out of our luxury apartment, my daughter in my arms and my heart in pieces. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done being Jake Thornton's fool. The taxi pulled up to my parents' modest home, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My mother opened the door before I could even knock, concern etched on her face. Irene, what's wrong, sweetheart? She asked, taking in my tear-stained face and Lily in my arms. Mom, I choked out. Jake, he's been cheating on me. My father appeared behind her, his expression hardening. That bastard, he muttered, ushering us inside. Over the next few hours, I poured out the whole sordid story to my parents. They were furious but supportive, insisting that Lily and I stay with them as long as we needed. But Jake wasn't content with just ending our marriage. He wanted to destroy me completely. I was served with court papers. He was suing for full custody of Lily, claiming I was an unfit mother. The allegations in the lawsuit made me sick. Jake painted me as unstable, neglectful, an alcoholic who cheated on him. Every word was a lie, but I knew how powerful the Thorntons were. My saving grace came in the form of the USB drive I'd taken from Jake's computer. In court, his smug expression faltered as my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, saw right through his lies. In the end, I was granted primary custody of Lily, with Jake ordered to pay a hefty amount in child support and alimony. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. A few weeks later, as I was settling into life at my parents' house, a sleek car pulled up outside. Jake stepped out, followed by a stunning woman I assumed was Vanessa. I'm here to see my daughter, Jake demanded as I opened the door. Before I could respond, Vanessa pushed past me into the house. Her nose wrinkled as she looked around. My God, Jake, she said loudly, this place is like a homeless shelter. And these old people? They're practically worthless. I saw red. How dare she insult my parents, who had welcomed me with open arms when I had nowhere else to go? Get out, I hissed, my voice shaking with rage. Both of you, get out of my house right now. Jake's face twisted with anger. You can't keep me from my child, Irene. I'll take her from you, just wait and see. As I slammed the door in their faces, I knew this wasn't over. Jake and Vanessa wouldn't stop until they'd taken everything from me. I needed to fight back. That night, I called my father's old police buddy, now a private investigator, named Frank. I need dirt on Jake and his new girlfriend, I told him. Anything you can find. Frank's investigation yielded more than I could have imagined. Vanessa, it turned out, had a colorful past as an escort, living off rich men's money. But that wasn't all. She was currently embezzling from Jake's company and selling insider information to their competitors. Even more shocking, Frank uncovered evidence that Jake himself was far from innocent. He'd been siphoning money from the company into offshore accounts for years. I had the power to bring Jake and Vanessa's world crashing down around them. But I wouldn't act rashly. No, I would bide my time, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash this information for maximum impact. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I was surprised to see Elizabeth Thornton's name on the caller ID. With some trepidation, I answered. Irene, Elizabeth's cold voice, came through the speaker. My birthday is next weekend. I expect Lily to be there. You may accompany her if you must. Before I could respond, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a plan forming in my mind. This was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. As we approached the Thornton mansion, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Richard answered the door, his face a mask of polite indifference. Ah, Irene. And little Lily, come in. The room was filled with the Thorntons' high society friends, all giving me curious looks. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Jake entered, Vanessa on his arm. His face registered surprise at seeing me, quickly masked by a smug smile. Everyone, he announced, I'd like you to meet Vanessa, my fiancée and future wife. The room erupted in congratulations. Elizabeth and Richard fawned over Vanessa, showering her with compliments. Oh, Jake, Elizabeth gushed. Vanessa is simply wonderful. Such impeccable breeding and education. A much better match for you than, well. She glanced dismissively in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. But now was not the time to lose control. I waited until the excitement died down, then slowly stood up. I have something to say, I announced, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I pulled out the folder from my purse and turned to address the room. You all seem very impressed with Vanessa. But do you know who she really is? The room fell silent as I began to reveal the truth. I explained how Vanessa was living under a false identity, how she had no real education, and how she had worked as an escort, sleeping with rich men for money. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Vanessa's face had gone pale, while Jake looked like he might be sick. But I wasn't finished. And that's not all, I continued. Vanessa has been selling company secrets to your competitors. She's been embezzling money from the company accounts Jake so trustingly gave her access to. Richard Thornton's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Is this true? He thundered, turning to Jake and Vanessa. Before either could respond, I delivered the final blow. And Jake? Jake has been transferring company funds to offshore accounts for years. The room erupted into chaos. Richard grabbed Vanessa by the arm, practically dragging her to the door. Get out of my house, you deceitful witch, he roared. I'll see you in court for this. He then rounded on Jake, his hand connecting with Jake's face in a resounding slap. You're fired, you ungrateful scoundrel. How dare you steal from your own family? In the midst of the pandemonium, I calmly picked up Lily and headed for the door. As I passed Jake, who was holding his reddened cheek, I paused. I told you you'd regret this, Jake, I said softly. Goodbye. In the weeks following the explosive revelation at Elizabeth's birthday party, my life took yet another unexpected turn. One afternoon, I received a call from Richard Thornton. Irene, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Elizabeth and we'd like to speak with you. In person, if possible. Curious and slightly apprehensive, I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe the next day. As I walked in, I saw them sitting at a corner table, looking older and more subdued than I'd ever seen them. Irene, Elizabeth began as I sat down. We owe you an apology. A big one. Richard nodded solemnly. We misjudged you terribly. You saved our company, our reputation. We can never thank you enough. Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we ever had before. They shared their regrets, their shock at Jake's betrayal, and their hope for a fresh start. By the time we left the cafe, a tentative peace had been established between us. Life continued to evolve rapidly. Vanessa was arrested for fraud and embezzlement, facing not just a hefty fine, but potential jail time. Jake, stripped of his position and his fancy apartment by his parents, left the state in disgrace. He would call occasionally to speak with Lily, but our interactions remained cold and distant. One day, Richard and Elizabeth invited me to their office. We have something for you, Richard said, handing me an envelope. Inside was the deed to a small but lovely apartment in a nice part of town. It's yours, Elizabeth explained. A thank you for saving the company. And a new start for you and Lily. I was overwhelmed by their generosity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it, Richard said warmly. And there's more. We'd like to pay for your education. You mentioned once that you dreamed of becoming a doctor? Tears welled up in my eyes. A cardiologist, actually. But I never thought. Now you can, Elizabeth smiled. Consider it an investment in our granddaughter's future. And so, at 30 years old, I found myself embarking on a new journey. Balancing single motherhood with medical school was challenging, but I was determined to succeed. Lily and I settled into our new apartment, building a life that was entirely our own. My name's Grace, and I used to think I had it all figured out. A great job as head of marketing, a loving husband Mark, and a comfortable life. I was paying off our mortgage with my own salary, feeling pretty damn proud of myself for being financially independent. Family was a big part of our lives, too. Mark had a younger brother, Tom, and their mom, Linda, was always around. Their dad had passed away years ago, so the boys made it a point to look after her. I found it touching, honestly. It made me love Mark even more, seeing how he cared for his family. Linda seemed to like me well enough at first. We'd chat over coffee during family gatherings, and she'd always ask about my work. Marketing, huh, she'd say, nodding approvingly. Sounds important. It felt good to have her approval. I wanted to fit in with Mark's family, to be part of their tight-knit group. Our first few years of marriage were filled with weekend barbecues, holiday dinners, and impromptu game nights with the extended family. I remember one Thanksgiving, all of us crammed around Linda's dining table, laughing and talking over each other. Pass the gravy, will ya? Mark's uncle bellowed from the end of the table. You've had enough gravy, old man. Linda shot back, but she was grinning as she handed over the boat. I looked around the table, taking in the familiar faces, feeling a sense of belonging. This was my family now, too. The first cracks started to show during a New Year's Eve party at Linda's house. I was in the kitchen, refilling my glass of wine, when I overheard Linda talking to Mark and Tom in the living room. Did you see what Carol's wearing? Linda snickered. That dress must have cost all of $5. I froze, my hand on the bottle. Carol was Mark's cousin, a single mom struggling to make ends meet. I'm just saying, Linda continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Some people should know their limits. Don't try to play with the big boys if you can't keep up. I felt my cheeks burn with second-hand embarrassment. This wasn't the warm, welcoming family I thought I knew. I peeked around the corner, watching as Linda leaned in conspiratorially to her sons, all three of them giggling like schoolchildren. As time went on, I couldn't ignore the growing unease I felt around Linda. What I'd initially brushed off as harmless teasing started to look a lot more like meanness. And it wasn't just Carol who was in her crosshairs. At every family gathering, Linda would huddle with Mark and Tom, their heads close together as they whispered and snickered. Their eyes would dart around the room, landing on various relatives and friends, before they'd burst into muffled laughter. One Easter Sunday, I couldn't take it anymore. Linda was holding court in the living room, Mark and Tom flanking her like loyal subjects. "Did you see Janet's new car?" Linda was saying, her voice low but not low enough. "Probably got it from the buy here pay here lot. I bet she'll be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew what I was doing, I was on my feet, marching over to Linda's little group. "Hey," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Don't you think that's a bit much? Janet can probably hear you." The room went silent. Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked up at me. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we've offended your delicate sensibilities, Grace." Mark and Tom exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I just think it's rude," I pressed on, my heart pounding. "Why do you always have to put people down?" Linda's fake smile disappeared. "If you don't like it, you don't have to listen. Why don't you go sit somewhere else?" I felt like I'd been slapped. I looked at Mark, expecting him to back me up, but he just stared at the floor. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "I will." From that day on, family gatherings became a special kind of hell. I'd sit alone, nursing a drink, while Mark stuck to his mother's side like glue. He'd throw me apologetic glances now and then, but he never came to sit with me. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" I asked him one night after a particularly awful dinner. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's my mother, Grace. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell her she's being cruel. I want you to have my back." But he never did. And slowly, I started finding reasons not to go to these family events. Work emergencies, migraines, anything to avoid the cold stares and whispered insults. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, life threw me another curveball. I was pregnant. I stared at the little plastic stick in my bathroom, my heart racing. 2 pink lines. Clear as day. "Mark," I called out, my voice shaky. "Can you come here?" He appeared in the doorway, his face concerned. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, I held out the test. His eyes widened as he took it from me. He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. Maybe this baby would bring us closer together, heal the rifts that had been growing between us. But life had other plans. The pregnancy was rough from the start. Constant nausea, dizziness, and a perpetual threat of miscarriage kept me on edge. My doctor put me on bed rest, which meant working remotely. As the weeks went by, my condition worsened. My eyesight started to deteriorate rapidly, a rare complication that my doctor said could be temporary, but might also be permanent. Squinting at my laptop became impossible. With a heavy heart, I had to quit my job. I needed Mark more than ever, but he seemed to be drifting away. He'd come home late from work, citing extra projects or drinks with colleagues. More often than not, I'd fall asleep alone, the echo of the front door closing jolting me awake in the middle of the night. The day of my C-section arrived faster than I expected. My eyesight had worsened to the point where the doctors insisted on the procedure. Natural birth was just too risky. As I lay on the cold operating table, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. "Where's Mark?" I asked the nurse, my voice trembling. She gave me a sympathetic smile. "Your husband's in the waiting room, dear. He said he'd rather stay there." The surgery went smoothly, and soon I heard the most beautiful sound, my son's first cry. As they placed him on my chest, I felt a rush of love so intense it took my breath away. Later, in the recovery room, Mark finally showed up. His face was a mask of discomfort and annoyance. "Look, Grace, I gotta say something. This whole thing? It's not right." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "Normal women give birth on their own, without all this surgery crap. And men? We're not supposed to be here for this. We should be meeting our wives and kids at home, like in the old days." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Mark, I couldn't risk Save it, he cut me off. I'm heading home. This place gives me the creeps. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Mark was rarely home, and when he was, he contributed nothing to our son's care. Instead, he'd complain constantly. "Can't you shut him up?" he'd growl as our baby cried in the middle of the night. "I'm trying," I'd say, exhaustion weighing heavily on me. "He's teething, Mark. It hurts him." But Mark had no patience for it. "All you do is focus on the kid. What about me, huh? What about our sex life?" I'd stare at him in disbelief. Here I was, running on 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from major surgery, and he was worried about sex. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's dissatisfaction grew. One evening, as I was trying to soothe our fussy 6-month-old, he dropped a bombshell. "You need to go back to work," he said flatly. I turned to him, shock written all over my face. "What? But the baby?" "We'll hire a nanny," he interrupted. "We can't keep living like this, Grace. We need the money." I wanted to argue, to tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't ready. But the determined look in his eyes told me it was pointless. So, with a heavy heart, I started job hunting. Finding work with my compromised vision wasn't easy. I eventually landed a position at a smaller company, but the pay was less than what I'd earned before. When I told Mark, his reaction was predictably negative. "That's it?" he scoffed. "We're paying a nanny for this?" I felt tears pricking at my eyes. "I'm doing my best, Mark. It's not easy with my eyesight." "Excuses," he muttered, walking away. And so began my new reality, rushing to work each morning, guilt gnawing at me as I left my baby with the nanny, struggling through the day with my limited vision, then coming home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Time flew by in a haze of work, childcare, and mounting tension at home. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed since my son's birth. Despite the challenges, I loved him fiercely and found joy in his every milestone. Family gatherings remained a source of stress, particularly due to Linda's behavior. She'd sweep in, playing the doting grandmother for show, but her indifference was palpable. "Come to Grandma," she'd coo, arms outstretched to my son. But he'd cling to me, turning his face away from this unfamiliar woman. Linda's face would darken with anger. "What have you been telling him about me?" she'd hiss. "You're turning my own grandson against me." I'd try to explain, my voice tired. "He just doesn't know you well, Linda. If you visited more often..." "Don't you dare blame this on me," she'd snap, stomping off to complain to Mark. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my world tilted on its axis once again. I stared at the pregnancy test in my hand, my heart racing. Positive. I was pregnant. Again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been so difficult, my health so compromised. Could my body handle another? But as I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision, it seemed, had been made for me. With shaking hands, I called Mark at work. "What is it?" he answered, his tone impatient. "Mark, I'm pregnant." There was a long pause. Then, "Look, Grace, I'm busy. We'll talk later. Just, don't quit your job, all right? We can't afford that." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling more alone than ever. Thankfully, this pregnancy proved easier than my first. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision remained stable. I continued working, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my belly swelled, the distance between Mark and me seemed to grow exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often not coming home until late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed while balancing my swollen belly, Mark walked in. "Hey," I said, hopeful for some help. "Can you read him a story? I'm exhausted." Mark glanced at us, then at his watch. "Can't. I promised Mom I'd help her move some furniture." "Don't wait up." As the door closed behind him, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I looked at my son, his big eyes staring up at me trustingly, and at my rounded belly, home to a child I already loved fiercely. As my 7th month of pregnancy rolled around, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests started arriving in the afternoon. My parents came early, my mom immediately rolling up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and relatives trickled in, filling our home with chatter and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Tom, Mark's younger brother, and to everyone's surprise, he had a woman with him. "Everyone, this is Melissa," Tom announced, beaming. "My fiancée." The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in congratulations. I plastered on a smile, trying to ignore the twinge of jealousy at the way Mark's eyes lit up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she took in Melissa. Well, she said, her voice dripping with approval. "Aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Throughout dinner, Linda fawned over Melissa, peppering her with questions and hanging on her every word. I tried to focus on being a good hostess, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. "So, Melissa," Linda said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "Tom tells me you're a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Melissa nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for about 5 years now." Linda beamed. "You must be doing very well for yourself. Unlike some people who can only pop out babies and breed poverty," she added, throwing a pointed look in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I placed a hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to make a scene. "You know," Linda continued, her voice sickeningly sweet, "Melissa here makes $15,000 a month. Now that's the kind of daughter-in-law I've always dreamed of. Smart, beautiful, successful." Tears pricked at my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, building a career I was proud of. All of that seemed forgotten now. "I think we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more suitable," Linda announced, standing up. "Melissa, dear, why don't we all go to that new restaurant downtown?" My treat, of course. Before I could process what was happening, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were heading for the door. Mark didn't even glance back at me as they left. The remaining guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the festive mood thoroughly ruined. One by one, they made their excuses and left, leaving only my parents behind. They offered to help me, but I refused, saying that they needed to rest themselves. Finally alone, I sank onto the couch and let the tears flow freely. Hours passed as I sobbed, my hand resting on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had come to this. It was nearly dawn when I heard the front door open. Mark stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and cigarette smoke. He didn't say a word as he made his way to the bedroom. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and opened social media. There they were, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa, grinning for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption read, "Best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting it was the safest option given that it had been less than 3 years since my last one. I tried to focus on preparing for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Mark. One chilly winter afternoon, I found him unpacking bags full of summer clothes. "What's all this?" I asked, puzzled. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my eyes. "Just saw a good sale. Thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth occupying my thoughts, I pushed my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, determined to take a couple of months off work to recover and bond with the new baby. My workplace had approved 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd set aside enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt prepared. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos erupted. I was resting on the couch when Mark burst through the door, Linda hot on his heels. "Hurry up," Linda barked as Mark rushed to our bedroom. I struggled to my feet, waddling after them. Mark was throwing clothes into a suitcase, the summer clothes he'd bought. "Mark?" I said, my voice rising with panic. "What are you doing?" He barely glanced at me. "Tom's getting married in Hawaii. We're all going." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who's going to take care of our son?" Mark zipped up his suitcase, finally meeting my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past me, Linda ushering him out. The door slammed, leaving me in stunned silence. Reality crashed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, hands shaking as I checked our joint account. Empty. All the money I'd saved, gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the final ring. "What?" he snapped. "The money," I choked out. "All our savings. Where is it?" There was a pause, then a cold laugh. "We needed it for Tom's wedding gift. Don't be so greedy, Grace." The line went dead. A sharp pain lanced through my abdomen. I looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic seized me. I couldn't go into labor now. The risk to my previous C-section scar was too great. With one hand on my belly and the other clutching my phone, I called emergency services. The hospital was chaos, doctors shouting, machines beeping. I woke hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face swam into view. "Grace," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "You're okay. The baby's okay." Slowly, the fog lifted. I'd nearly died. My baby had nearly died. But we'd made it. 3 days after the emergency C-section, I was feeling surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and gave me the green light to go home. Mark hadn't called once since he'd left for Hawaii. Not to check if I was alive, not to ask about his new son. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was immediate and supportive. My parents doted on both boys, giving me time to rest and recover. I started researching divorce lawyers and gathering documentation of our finances. Then, exactly a week after I'd left the hospital, my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice, before finally answering on the third call. "Where the hell are you? Why aren't you at home?" Mark's voice was a mixture of anger and confusion. I took a deep breath. "I'm at my parents', Mark. With both of our sons. I've filed for divorce." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a bark of laughter. "Divorce? Are you kidding me? After everything I've done for you?" "Everything you've done?" I felt a surge of anger. "You mean like abandoning me right before I gave birth? Or stealing all our savings?" "Oh, get over it," he scoffed. "I'll pay you back, no problem. In fact, I don't even want to see you again. You know why? Because I'm going to be rich." He launched into a tirade about how Tom's new wife had offered him a job as her deputy at the bank. How they were going to start their own financial company. How she was going to make them all wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. "You never believed in me, Grace," he spat. "You always shot down my ideas, always held me back. Well, guess what? I'm free now. And you? You're just a loser who can't see potential when it's right in front of her." The divorce proceedings moved quickly. To my surprise, Mark didn't contest anything. He returned the money he'd taken from our accounts and agreed to pay alimony. When it came to the house, I had years of mortgage statements proving I'd been the one making payments. The judge awarded it to me without hesitation. The day I returned to my house with the boys, Mark was there, packing up the last of his things. He sneered as I walked in, the baby in my arms and our toddler holding my hand. "Enjoy this dump while you can," he said, hefting a box. "I'll be in a mansion soon, swimming in cash. You'll see what you missed out on." As he walked out the door, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The house suddenly felt bigger, brighter. A year and a half had passed since the divorce. Life had settled into a new normal for me and my boys. I'd returned to work, finding a balance between my career and motherhood. It wasn't always easy, but we were happy, healthy, and thriving. One ordinary Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a news alert. As I read the headline, my jaw dropped. Local banker exposed as fraud, leaves family in ruins. The article detailed a shocking scandal. Melissa, Tom's wife, had been running an elaborate con. She'd convinced Mark, Tom, and Linda to take out massive loans to fund a non-existent financial company. They'd even mortgaged Linda's house, pouring every penny they had into this imaginary venture. But Melissa wasn't a banker at all. The office she'd shown them was a short-term rental, a prop in her elaborate scheme. She'd disappeared with millions, leaving behind a trail of forged documents and broken dreams. To make matters worse, I discovered they'd taken out an additional loan to fund Tom and Melissa's lavish Hawaiian wedding, the very event Mark had abandoned us for. As I read on, a mix of emotions washed over me. Shock, confusion, and, I'll admit, a twinge of satisfaction. The consequences were severe. Unable to repay their debts, they lost everything. Linda's house, their cars, even their personal belongings, all seized by creditors. They were left with nothing but mountains of debt. I heard through the grapevine that Linda had been forced to take a job as a cashier just to afford a tiny apartment and groceries. Mark and Tom were in similar straits, their dreams of wealth and success shattered. I was beyond grateful that I divorced Mark when I did. My children and I were safe, unaffected by the financial disaster that had befallen my ex-husband's family. Just when I thought I'd put it all behind me, my phone rang. Linda's number flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grace? Linda's voice was small, a far cry from her usual imperious tone. We need your help. She launched into a plea, asking if they could stay with us. The children need their father and grandmother, she insisted. You can't leave family in trouble. I took a deep breath, memories flooding back, of Thanksgiving humiliation, of being abandoned before my C-section, of the countless times they'd belittled and dismissed me. Family? I said, my voice steady. You weren't concerned about family when you left me alone, pregnant, and in danger. You weren't concerned about family when you stole my savings. You weren't concerned about family when you called me a loser. Linda started to protest, but I cut her off. I'm sorry you're in this situation, Linda. But I'm not responsible for the choices you, Mark, and Tom made. My priority is my children, and I won't expose them to the chaos you've created. Please don't contact me again. I hung up, then immediately blocked her number. As I set down the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. Truly done. I'm Kimberly, and this is the story of how my family fell apart. It all started when I was 7 years old, and my little brother Tommy turned 5. I remember the day clearly. Mom had taken Tommy to his first real music lesson. When they came back, she was practically floating on air. Kim, come here, she called out, her voice high with excitement. I came running down the stairs, wondering what all the fuss was about. Your brother is a musical genius. I didn't really know what that meant, but I could tell it was important. That's great, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. The teacher says he has perfect pitch, Mom continued, her eyes shining. Do you know how rare that is? He's going to be a star, I just know it. From that day on, it was all about Tommy. Mom quit her part-time job to focus on his career. She'd spend hours researching music competitions and TV shows for kids. Our living room turned into a mini recording studio, with a keyboard, microphone, and even a small karaoke machine. Don't get me wrong, Tommy was good. When he sang, his voice was clear and pure, like a little angel. But I couldn't help feeling left out. Mom was too wrapped up in Tommy's potential stardom, and Dad was barely around. He'd leave for work before I woke up and come home after I was in bed. On weekends, he'd tinker in the garage or watch TV, too exhausted to do much else. So, I learned to take care of myself. I'd make my own lunches, do my homework without being asked, and try not to bother anyone with my problems. It wasn't all bad, though. I had my books, my few close friends, and my grandma. Grandma was Mom's mother, but they couldn't have been more different. While Mom was all about the spotlight and fame, Grandma was down-to-earth and practical. She owned a small convenience store in town, and I started helping out there after school when I was 12. "You're a good worker, Kimberly," she'd say, smiling at me over her glasses. "Smart with money, too. That'll serve you well in life." Those words meant more to me than all the vague praise I got at home. At least someone saw me for who I was, not just as Tommy's sister. Speaking of Tommy, he was thriving under Mom's attention. By the time he was 7, he'd already won a few local singing competitions. Mom would come home, waving his trophies and certificates, her face glowing with pride. "Did you see Tommy on TV last night?" she'd ask me, not waiting for an answer. The judges said he was the most talented child they'd seen in years. I'd nod and smile, trying to be happy for my brother. But I couldn't help the twinge of jealousy when I saw how differently we were treated. Tommy had the latest toys and gadgets, while I had to save up my allowance for months to buy anything I wanted. As I entered high school, the divide between Tommy and me grew even wider. While I attended the local public school, Mom enrolled Tommy in an expensive private academy known for its music program. Every morning, she'd drop him off in our beat-up minivan, fussing over his uniform and reminding him about his after-school voice lessons. Meanwhile, I'd be halfway to school already, having caught the early bus. One day, after a particularly grueling day of classes and a shift at Grandma's store, I came home to find Mom and Tommy sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by brochures and flyers. "What's all this?" I asked, dropping my backpack by the door. Mom looked up, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh, Kim, you won't believe it. Tommy's been invited to audition for the National Youth Choir. The audition's in New York. We'll need to buy new clothes, book flights, a hotel." I couldn't help but ask, "Can we afford all that?" Mom's smile faltered for a moment. "We'll manage. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Tommy. We can't let it pass by." I nodded, knowing better than to argue. But as I headed up to my room, I couldn't help but wonder, what about my opportunities? It wasn't that I was jealous of Tommy's talent. I was proud of him, in a way. But I was tired of being an afterthought in my own family. That night, I heard Mom and Dad arguing in their bedroom. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out enough to know it was about money. "We're already in debt, Linda," Dad was saying. "We can't keep spending like this." "But this could be Tommy's big break," Mom insisted. "Don't you want him to succeed?" "Of course I do," Dad sighed. "But what about Kim? We haven't put aside anything for her college fund." There was a pause, and then Mom's voice, softer now, "Kim's smart. She'll get scholarships. Besides, she's always been independent. She'll figure something out." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, their words echoing in my head. She'll figure something out. That's what it always came down to, didn't it? I was expected to fend for myself while they poured everything into Tommy's future. The next day, I went to work at Grandma's store. As I was restocking shelves, Grandma called me over to the counter. "Kimberly," she said, her voice gentle. "Is everything all right? You seem distracted today." I hesitated for a moment, then the whole story came spilling out, Tommy's audition, the money problems, my fears about college. Grandma listened patiently, her face growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, she shook her head. "Listen, I've been thinking. You're a hard worker, Kimberly. How would you like to start earning a real wage here at the store? Not just pocket money, but something you could save for your future." For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and appreciated. As I hugged my grandmother, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could create my own opportunities. I didn't need to wait for someone else to invest in my future. With Grandma's help, I could start investing in myself. As the years went by, I threw myself into my studies and my work at Grandma's store. By the time I was 15, I'd managed to save up a decent amount. My goal? A laptop for school. One Friday afternoon, I decided to count my savings. I went to my closet and pulled out the pink ceramic piggy bank Grandma had given me years ago. But when I shook it, something felt off. The familiar jingle of coins was missing. My heart racing, I opened the bottom and turned it over. Nothing, not a single coin fell out. With shaking hands, I made my way downstairs. Tommy was sprawled on the couch, playing video games on a shiny new console. "Hey, Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You haven't seen my piggy bank, have you? Or the money inside it?" He barely glanced up from his game. "Nope, sorry." I took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen, where Mom was preparing dinner. "Mom," I began, Did you take the money from my piggy bank?" She turned to me, her face calm. "Oh, that. Yes, I did." Tommy needed a new game console. His old one broke, and he was so upset. "I knew you had some savings, so I took it." I stood there, speechless. Tears were threatening to spill, but I refused to let them fall. When will you pay me back?" I managed to ask. Mom sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "We'll see. Times are tight right now, with all of Tommy's expenses. You understand, don't you? This is an investment in his future." I didn't understand. I couldn't understand how she could do this to me. Without another word, I turned and ran out of the house. I kept running until I reached Grandma's store, tears blurring my vision. Grandma took one look at me and flipped the open sign to closed. She led me to the back room and sat me down. "What happened, Kimberly?" she asked gently. Between sobs, I told her everything. As I spoke, I watched Grandma's face change from concern to disbelief to anger. "What am I going to do, Grandma?" I asked, feeling more lost than ever. "I can't trust them." Grandma was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. "Wait here," she said. She disappeared into the front of the store. When she came back, she was carrying a laptop box. "I was saving this for your birthday," she said, placing the box in my lap. "But I think you need it now. Just don't take this home. Keep it here at the store. Use it after your shifts or on weekends. I don't want your mother getting her hands on this too." That night, as I lay in bed, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone take advantage of me like that again. I would work harder, save more, and find a way out of this house where I felt like a stranger. My 16th birthday rolled around with little fanfare. Mom remembered the date this time, at least. She and Dad wished me a happy birthday over breakfast, Dad sliding a card across the table before rushing off to work. I invited a few close friends. We set up some folding tables in the backyard, strung up some lights, and had a pretty good time. I'd saved up from my job at Grandma's store to buy snacks and drinks. My best friend Rachel helped me decorate with some balloons and streamers we got from the dollar store. As we sat around, eating chips and laughing about school drama, I caught myself feeling genuinely happy. For a moment, I could forget about the family dynamics and just be a normal teenager celebrating her birthday. But reality has a way of creeping back in. When Tommy's 16th birthday came around 2 years later, it was an extravaganza. They rented out the fanciest restaurant in town, invited what seemed like half the city, and even hired a professional photographer. The cherry on top? A shiny new car parked outside with a big red bow. I stood off to the side during the party, watching Tommy beam as he accepted congratulations and gifts. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to resent him. This wasn't his fault. He was just living the life our parents, especially Mom, had orchestrated for him. A few months later, I was thrilled to learn I'd been accepted to study economics at a college in the next state. Even better, I'd earned a partial scholarship. But as I soon discovered, partial was the operative word. The scholarship wouldn't cover all my expenses. With trepidation, I approached my parents one evening. "Mom, Dad," I began. "I got into State University for economics. I have a scholarship, but I'll need some help with the rest of the tuition and living expenses." Dad looked up from his newspaper, a crease between his brows. "That's great news about the scholarship, Kim. But you know money's tight right now. With Tommy's music school fees." Mom jumped in. "Kimberly, you're a smart girl. I'm sure you can figure something out. Maybe get a job? You've always been so independent." Defeated, I retreated to my room. As I sat on my bed, staring at the acceptance letter, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Grandma, asking how the conversation with my parents went. I called her back, my voice shaking as I recounted what had happened. Grandma listened quietly, then said, "Kimberly, don't you worry. We'll figure this out together." True to her word, Grandma set up a college fund for me. Between that, my scholarship, and a part-time job I picked up at a cafe near campus, I managed to make it work. "You're going to do great things, Kimberly," Grandma said. "I'm so proud of you." Those words carried me through the tough times in college. When I was up late studying, or pulling double shifts at the cafe, I'd remember Grandma's faith in me and push through. I called Tommy occasionally, trying to keep our connection alive. He was at a prestigious music college, all expenses paid by our parents, of course. Despite the differences in our situations, it was nice to hear his voice, to know that at least one person in that house might be missing me. After 4 grueling years of balancing studies, work, and tight budgets, I finally graduated with my degree in economics. Armed with my hard-earned qualifications and a determination to succeed, I returned to my hometown. It wasn't long before I landed a job at a prestigious financial firm and found a small but comfortable apartment to rent. Life settled into a pleasant routine. Work was challenging but rewarding, and in my free time I started to build a life for myself outside of my family's shadow. I made new friends, took up hiking on weekends, and even started dating a bit. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. She stepped inside, wringing her hands. "Kimberly, I need your help." Those words sent a chill down my spine. In all my years, I couldn't remember my mother ever asking for my help. "What's wrong?" I asked, leading her to the couch. She sat down heavily, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sick, Kim, really sick. The doctors, they say I need treatment, but our insurance won't cover it all." My heart dropped. Despite everything, she was still my mother. "How much do you need?" $15,000, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know it's a lot, but I didn't know where else to turn. "Your father and we've spent everything on Tommy's education. We thought it would pay off by now, but..." The next morning, we drove to the bank in silence. As we waited in line, Mom started talking, her voice low. "You know, Tommy's doing so well," she said. "He's got offers from several big music groups. Once he signs, we'll be able to pay you back in no time." I nodded, only half listening. My mind was racing, thinking about how I'd manage the loan repayments on top of my rent and other expenses. After signing what felt like a mountain of paperwork, I transferred the $15,000 to my mother's account. As we left the bank, she hugged me tightly. A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed during my lunch break when I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was Tommy, my brother, posting selfies from the Swiss Alps. Confused, I quickly sent him a message. "Hey Tommy, aren't you supposed to be in school? What are you doing in Switzerland?" His reply came quickly, "Oh, hey Kim. Yeah, Mom surprised me with this trip. Said I was having a creative block and needed to recharge. It's amazing here. I'm staying for 2 months." I stared at my phone, my mind refusing to process what I was reading. 2 months in Switzerland? Creative block? Then it hit me. The $15,000 loan. It wasn't for medical treatment, it was for Tommy's vacation. With shaking hands, I called my mother. "Kimberly, what is it now?" Her voice was irritated, as if I was interrupting something important. I took a deep breath. "Mom, we need to talk about the loan. About Tommy's trip. How could you lie to me like that?" There was a pause, then she sighed. "Now, listen here. Your brother is a creative person. He needs constant inspiration and pampering to open up creatively. This trip was essential for his career. He's going to be famous, and we all need to support him." "Support him?" I echoed, my voice rising. "By taking out loans we can't afford? By lying to your other child?" "Oh, don't be such a miser," she scoffed. "You should be happy to support your brother." That was the last straw. "Mom, I want the money back. All of it. Now." Her laugh was cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Kimberly. The money's spent. Besides, you're doing well enough. You don't need it." "If you don't pay me back," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "I'll sue you." There was a moment of stunned silence, then she exploded. "Sue me? Your own mother? You're a terrible daughter. I can't believe I raised such a selfish, heartless child." "This is your last chance, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Pay me back, or I'm going to court." "Go ahead," she spat. "See if I care. You're dead to me, Kimberly. Dead." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, shaking with a mix of anger and shock. I'd known this conversation wouldn't go well, but I never imagined it would end like this. In a daze, I called the one person I knew I could always count on, Grandma. I broke down, sobbing as I recounted everything that had happened. Grandma listened patiently, making soothing noises as I poured out my heart. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Grandma spoke, her voice firm. "Kimberly, listen to me. What your mother did was wrong. If you decide to go through with this, I'll support you. I know a good lawyer, my friend's son. He might be willing to take on your case for a reduced fee." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and sleepless nights. True to her word, Grandma covered the legal fees and introduced me to her friend's son, a sharp young lawyer named Michael. "It's an open and shut case," Michael assured me after our first meeting. "We have the bank records, the text messages. Your mother doesn't have a leg to stand on." The day of the trial arrived. As I walked into the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time in months. She sat on the other side, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't even look at me. The proceedings seemed to pass in a blur. Michael presented our case clearly and concisely, showing the judge the evidence of my mother's deception. When it was her turn to speak, my mother spun a tale of a desperate need for a family medical emergency, but her story quickly fell apart under questioning. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made his ruling. In the matter of Kimberly Johnson versus Linda Johnson, he began, "I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of $15,000, plus interest and court costs." A few days later, I received notice that my mother had taken out a loan to repay me. The money was back in my account, but it felt hollow somehow. I'd won the case, but I'd lost my family in the process. The dust had barely settled from the court case when the real storm hit. It started with a notification on my phone. A friend had tagged me in a post. Curious, I opened it, only to feel my stomach drop. There, on my mother's social media page, was a long, heart-wrenching post about how her own daughter had cruelly taken her to court. She painted herself as a loving, sacrificial mother who had given everything for her children, only to be betrayed in her time of need. My phone buzzed constantly over the next few days as more relatives reached out, not to hear my side, but to berate me for my actions. "I raised you better than this," my aunt scolded. "You brought shame to this entire family," a cousin messaged. "Don't bother coming to the next family reunion," an uncle warned. In the midst of this storm, there was one unwavering source of support, Grandma. She called me every day, her voice a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. "Don't you pay any mind to those fools," she'd say firmly. "They don't know the half of what's been going on in that house all these years." A week after my mother's posts went viral, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in years, my father's. "I've been seeing your mother's posts," he began, and I braced myself for the criticism. But then he surprised me. "I want to hear your side of the story. The full story." So I told him everything. The years of feeling overlooked, the incident with my piggy bank, the struggles through college, and finally, the loan and the betrayal that led to the lawsuit. There was a long silence when I finished. Then, to my shock, my father's voice came back thick with emotion. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "Kimberly, I'm so sorry. I failed you as a father. I followed your mother's lead for too long. I told myself I was providing for the family by working long hours, but the truth is, I was running away from the problems at home. I should have been there for you." Tears were streaming down my face now. This was the most open, honest conversation I'd had with my father in, well, ever. "I've got a lot to make up for," he said. "I know that. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to be the father I should have been all along." As we continued to talk, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a parent in my corner. It wasn't going to fix everything overnight, but it was a start. After our heart-to-heart, Dad decided to take a closer look at the family finances, something he admitted he should have done years ago. He had found that Mom had been secretly withdrawing money from their joint account for years, funneling it all into Tommy's career. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd taken out multiple loans in both their names, all to fund Tommy's pursuits. They were drowning in debt, and Dad had been completely in the dark. The confrontation that followed was explosive. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from the neighbors. There was shouting, the sound of dishes shattering, and finally, the arrival of police cars. In the aftermath, Dad filed for divorce. The proceedings were messy, but in the end, Mom got half of everything, which went straight to paying off her mountain of debt. I maintained my distance from Mom, focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Dad and cherishing the unwavering support of Grandma. Life started to feel normal. Then, about a year after the divorce, Mom's triumphant posts started appearing on social media again. Tommy had graduated from his music college and landed a spot in a famous band. Her captions were full of "I told you so's" and thinly veiled jabs at Dad and me. "Some people couldn't see the potential," she wrote. "But a mother always knows." Who's laughing now? I tried not to let it get to me. I was doing well at work, had just made a down payment on my own apartment, and was finally feeling like I was on solid ground. Dad was doing better too, seeming happier and more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 2 years after Tommy's big break, he took another trip to Switzerland. His social media was full of glamorous shots of the Alps, videos of him partying with his bandmates. Then, one chilly morning, he decided to film himself singing at the top of a mountain, wanting to impress his fans with his vocal range in the thin, cold air. It was a disaster. He caught a severe cold that developed into a serious throat infection. Despite the best medical care, the damage was done. Tommy lost his singing voice. The news hit Mom hard. Her neighbors later told me that they heard screaming coming from her house, sounds of things being thrown and broken. When they went to check on her, they found her in a state of total hysteria. She didn't recognize anyone, kept babbling about lost fortunes and ruined dreams. They had no choice but to call for help. Mom was admitted to a mental health facility. The doctors diagnosed her with a severe nervous breakdown, exacerbated by years of stress. As for Tommy, he spiraled into depression and turned to alcohol. For months, we weren't sure if he'd pull through. But slowly, with support from Dad and me, he started to turn things around. He got sober and, in a twist that surprised us all, applied to college to become a music teacher. I can't sing anymore, he told me over coffee one day. But maybe I can help other kids who love music. Do it right, you know? Without all the pressure and crazy expectations. I felt a surge of pride for my little brother. I think that's a great idea, Tommy. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the tumultuous journey of the past few years. I thought about Mom, still in the facility, trapped in a world of her own making. About Dad, finally free to live his own life. About Tommy, finding a new path. And about myself. I'd stood my ground, fought for what was right, and come out stronger on the other side. My name's Regina, and I became a single mom when my daughter, Mia, was just 10. My ex-husband, Tom, decided he'd found greener pastures with another woman. Just like that, he was gone, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our shattered family. From that day on, it was just the two of us. I threw myself into work, determined to give Mia everything she needed. I climbed the corporate ladder, worked overtime, took on extra projects, anything to make sure my little girl wouldn't want for anything. The trauma of abandonment hit Mia hard. She became withdrawn, angry. Her grades started slipping, and she'd lash out at the slightest provocation. I was at my wit's end, trying to be both mom and dad, provider and nurturer. Finally, I decided to take her to a psychologist. Dr. Sarah was kind and patient, but even she struggled with Mia's anger. "Your daughter's dealing with a lot of pain," she told me after one particularly difficult session. "It's going to take time, Regina. Be patient with her." Years passed, and things got better, or so I thought. Mia seemed to be healing, growing into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. But there was an undercurrent of resentment that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't until I started trying to date again that I realized the full extent of the damage Tom had done. Every time I'd meet someone new, someone who might actually be interested in me as more than just Mia's mom, she'd fly off the handle. The first time it happened, I was blindsided. I'd been seeing Mark for a few weeks, and things were going well. He was kind, funny, and he seemed to genuinely care about me. I thought it was time for him to meet Mia. "Honey," I said one morning over breakfast. "I've invited someone over for dinner tonight. His name's Mark, and I want the two most important people in my life to know each other." She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Is he your boyfriend or something?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. "We've been seeing each other, yes. But it's not serious yet. That's why I want you to meet him." "No," she said flatly. "I don't want to meet him. I don't want him in our house. Cancel the dinner." I was shocked. "Mia, sweetie, I know this might be difficult for you, but..." "Difficult?" she shouted, standing up so suddenly, her chair fell backward. "You think this is difficult? You want to abandon me like he did? To start a new family and forget all about me?" She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I should have known then that this was just the beginning. Despite Mia's outburst, I decided to go ahead with the dinner. I thought maybe if she met Mark, she'd see he wasn't a threat. God, was I wrong? Mark arrived at 7, looking nervous but eager. I introduced him to Mia, who barely looked at him. "Nice to meet you, Mia," he said, extending his hand. "Your mom's told me a lot about you." Mia ignored his hand. "I bet she has," she muttered. The tension was thick as we sat down to eat. I tried to keep the conversation light, but Mia's one-word answers and glares made it difficult. Halfway through the meal, Mark made an innocent comment about how nice it was to have a home-cooked dinner. That's when Mia exploded. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love to have this all the time, wouldn't you?" she sneered. "Playing happy families with my mom?" "Mia," I warned, but she was just getting started. "What, Mom? Isn't that what this is? You trying to replace Dad? Trying to throw me away like he did?" "That's not what this is at all," I said, my voice shaking. I'm just trying to. To what? To ruin everything? Mia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Well, guess what? I won't let you. Before I could react, she grabbed her plate and hurled it to the floor. The crash of breaking china was deafening in the sudden silence. Mia, I gasped. What are you doing? But she wasn't listening. She grabbed another plate, then another, smashing them on the ground. Food and broken dishes were everywhere. This is our home, she screamed. Ours, not his. Mark stood up, looking shell-shocked. I think I should go, he said quietly. After Mark left, Mia locked herself in her room. I spent the night cleaning up the mess, tears mixing with the soapy water as I scrubbed the floor. The next day, Mia acted like nothing had happened. But something had changed. From that day on, any attempt I made to date was met with hostility and tantrums. Years passed, and I found myself pushing away anyone who showed interest in me. It was easier than dealing with Mia's reactions. I told myself it was temporary, that once Mia was older, she'd understand. But deep down, I knew I was just making excuses. When Mia graduated high school, I was so proud. Despite everything, she'd done well in school and gotten into a good college. I thought maybe now, things would change. Mom, she said the night before she left for college, you won't bring anyone home while I'm gone, will you? I sighed. Mia, honey, you're going to be living your own life now. Don't you think it's time for me to do the same? Her face darkened. So you are planning to replace me? Mia, please, I begged. That's not fair. I've spent the last 8 years putting you first. I've given up everything for you. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Mia's eyes filled with tears. So I'm just a burden to you, is that it? She cried. A sacrifice you had to make? No, sweetie, that's not what I meant at all. I tried to backtrack, but it was too late. Mia stormed off to her room, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, she left for college without saying goodbye. With Mia away at college, I finally had a chance to rediscover myself. I started taking better care of myself, got a new haircut, bought some new clothes, even joined a gym. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more. And then I met David. He was kind, funny, and understood my situation with Mia. We started dating, and for a while, everything was perfect. But Mia, even from college, still tried to control my life. Every call, every visit home, she'd grill me about my social life. Mom, you haven't let anyone into our house, have you? She'd demand. I tried to reason with her. Honey, you're living your own life now. Don't you think it's time I did the same? But she'd get angry, threaten to drop out of college, say she couldn't focus on her studies, knowing I was replacing her. Once, after finding out about David, she called me in tears. How could you do this to me? My grades are suffering because I'm so upset about you dating. It was exhausting, constantly walking on eggshells, trying to balance my happiness with Mia's demands. But I kept hoping things would get better once she graduated and started her own life. 4 years passed in this push and pull. Then, out of the blue, Mia called. Mom, I'm coming home. And I'm bringing someone with me. My heart leapt. Maybe she'd finally found someone and understood why I'd wanted to date. Maybe now, things would change. When they arrived, I was shocked. Mia introduced the man beside her not as her boyfriend, but as her husband. This is Jake, she said, a challenging look in her eyes. We got married last week in Vegas. I couldn't believe it. My daughter was married, and I hadn't even known she was dating someone. Mia, I gasped, why didn't you tell me? Why wasn't I invited? She shrugged. We only met a few days ago. It was spontaneous. They didn't stay long. As they were leaving, I hugged Mia tightly. I hope you'll be very happy, I whispered, trying to ignore the knot of worry in my stomach. For 6 months, I heard little from Mia. I tried to give them space, hoping they were settling into married life. Then, one rainy night, Mia showed up at my door, mascara streaking down her face. "He cheated on me," she sobbed. "I found him with another woman. We're getting divorced." Mia moved back in, quickly found a job, but showed no signs of looking for her own place. And I, remembering how she'd reacted to my attempts at independence, didn't push her. I was 46, Mia was 24, and we were settled into an uneasy coexistence when the doctor delivered the news that shattered our world. I had intestinal cancer. The diagnosis hit me like a freight train. Cancer. The word alone was terrifying. When I told Mia, she broke down in tears. "Mom," she sobbed, clinging to me, "I'll take care of you. I promise. We'll get through this together." In that moment, all our past conflicts seemed to melt away. I quit my job, thankful for the savings I'd squirreled away over the years. At least we wouldn't have to worry about money on top of everything else. The chemotherapy started, and with it came a host of new challenges. I was constantly exhausted, nauseous, and in pain. Mia took time off work to care for me, and at first, she was attentive and enthusiastic. But as the days wore on, the reality of my condition began to wear on her. The cancer had wreaked havoc on my digestive system. I struggled to use the bathroom, often needing help to clean myself afterward. It was humiliating, but I had no choice. After particularly rough chemo sessions, I'd be too weak to even make it to the toilet. I started noticing changes in Mia's behavior. The loving concern in her eyes was gradually replaced by something else, disgust. She'd wrinkle her nose when she came near me, complaining about the smell. "Mom, you stink," she'd say, not even trying to hide her revulsion. "Can't you do something about it?" I wanted to scream at her, to remind her that I was fighting for my life, that I couldn't control what the cancer and chemo were doing to my body. But I bit my tongue. She was trying, in her own way, and that had to be enough. One day, after a particularly difficult morning, Mia approached me with a determined look on her face. "Mom, I think I need to go back to work," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We should hire a nurse to take care of you." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand. We'll look into getting a nurse." The clinic where I was receiving treatment assigned a nurse named Sarah to help me at home. She was a godsend, strong, capable, and unfailingly kind. She handled my hygiene needs efficiently and without a trace of disgust. "Don't you worry, Regina," she'd say cheerfully as she helped me clean up. "We'll have you feeling fresh as a daisy in no time." With Sarah's help, my quality of life improved dramatically. But Mia wasn't happy about the arrangement. "I don't like having a stranger in our house all the time," she complained. "It's invasive." I tried to explain that Sarah was necessary for my care, but Mia wouldn't listen. Then, one evening, she dropped a bombshell. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Maybe it would be better if you moved to a specialized care facility. I could look after the house, and you'd get round-the-clock care." I stared at her, shocked. "No, I'm not leaving my home. This is where I'm comfortable, and this is where I'm going to fight this cancer." Mia's face clouded over with anger and frustration. "Fine," she snapped. "Have it your way." As she stormed off, I felt a deep sadness settle over me. I was fighting for my life, but it felt like I was losing my daughter in the process. As the chemo treatments continued, my body waged war against itself. Each day brought new challenges, new indignities. But nothing prepared me for the day my hair started falling out in clumps. I was in the bathroom, running my fingers through my long, once beautiful hair, when a handful came away in my palm. I stared at it, numb with shock. Mia's shriek jolted me back to reality. "Mom, there's hair everywhere. I'm sick of cleaning it up." I looked at her, standing in the doorway, her face twisted in disgust and frustration. In that moment, I made a decision. "Sarah," I called weakly to my nurse. "Could you please cut my hair?" As Sarah carefully sheared away my locks, I caught sight of Mia in the mirror. Instead of offering support or comfort, she was laughing. "You look like an alien," she snickered. "Maybe you should get a wig." Her words cut deeper than any surgeon's scalpel. That night, after Sarah had gone home and Mia had retreated to her room, I cried silently into my pillow. Where had I gone wrong? How had my sweet little girl turned into this cruel stranger? Weeks passed, and I continued my battle against cancer. Every day was a struggle, but I was determined to fight. Then, one afternoon, Mia dropped another bombshell. "Mom, I'm having some friends over for my birthday next week," she announced casually. I blinked in surprise. "Here? Honey, I don't think that's a good idea." The noise. "I need rest." Mia's face hardened. "If you don't like it, you can go somewhere else for the night." "Actually, that might be better. I won't have to be embarrassed by you in front of my friends or deal with the smell." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been bedridden for days, barely able to move. But in that moment, fury gave me strength. I pushed myself up, fixing her with a glare that would have made my own mother proud. "This is my house," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "If you don't like living here with me, you're welcome to leave." Mia's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "You're so selfish," she screamed. "All you think about is yourself. You know what? It would be better for everyone if you just died already. Then you'd stop being such an inconvenience to everyone around you." The room fell silent. I stared at my daughter, unable to believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. In her eyes, I saw no trace of the little girl I'd raised, no hint of love or compassion. Just cold, hard anger. "Get out," I shouted, surprising even myself with the force in my voice. "Pack your things and get out of my house. Now." For a moment, Mia just stood there, shocked. Then, with a scream of frustration, she stormed off to her room. I could hear her throwing things into bags, slamming drawers. Minutes later, she stormed past me, bags in hand. "I hate you," she spat as she reached the door. "I wish Dad had taken me with him when he left." And then she was gone, the front door slamming behind her. She didn't even bother to close it properly. The open door mocked me, a glaring reminder of Mia's dramatic exit. I sat there, staring at it, feeling utterly drained. Finally, I reached for my phone with shaking hands and dialed my friend, Linda. "Linda," I croaked when she answered. "I need help. Can you come over?" Linda arrived in record time, concern etched on her face. She closed the door, then rushed to my side. "Regina, what happened?" The whole story poured out of me, Mia's cruelty, her harsh words, her abrupt departure. Linda listened, her face a mix of shock and anger. "Oh, Regina," she sighed when I finished. "You need to forget about that ungrateful girl and focus on yourself. You're fighting cancer, for God's sake." We talked for hours, tears flowing freely between us. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, I came to a painful realization. "It's my fault," I whispered. "I raised her to be this way. I always put her needs first, ignored my own. I thought I was being a good mother, but I was just teaching her to be selfish. From now on, I'm going to be selfish. I'm going to think about myself for once." True to my word, I threw myself into my treatment with renewed vigor. Sarah, my nurse, was a godsend, helping me through the worst days with gentle care and unwavering support. 2 more rounds of chemotherapy followed. They were brutal, leaving me weak and nauseous, but I refused to give up. All the while, my phone remained silent. No calls, no texts from Mia. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that I needed to focus on my health, but the silence hurt more than I cared to admit. Months passed. Then, during a routine checkup, my doctor smiled at me, really smiled, for the first time since my diagnosis. "The cancer's receding, Regina," he said. "You're not out of the woods yet, but this is very, very good news." I left the hospital that day feeling lighter than I had in months. The world seemed brighter somehow, full of possibilities I'd thought were lost to me forever. I was thin, almost gaunt, after months of illness. My clothes hung off me like sacks. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. I started taking short walks in the park near my house, feeling the sun on my face, the breeze in what remained of my hair. One afternoon, I stood in front of my closet, realizing none of my old clothes fit me anymore. Instead of feeling sad, I felt liberated. It was time for a change, inside and out. I spent a day sorting through my wardrobe, making piles to donate to a local homeless shelter. As I packed up bags of my old life, I felt like I was shedding more than just clothes. I was letting go of the old Regina, the one who'd let herself be walked all over, who'd put everyone else's needs before her own. Looking around my big, empty house, I realized it no longer fit the person I'd become. It was time for a change. With my savings providing a comfortable cushion, I made a bold decision: I wouldn't return to work. Instead, I'd downsize and focus on living. I contacted a realtor and put my house on the market. It sold quickly, and I found a small, cozy apartment that felt like it was made for me. It was perfect for one person, bright, manageable, and full of potential for a fresh start. I invested the remaining money from the house sale, feeling financially secure for the first time in years. Life was good, peaceful. I spent my days exploring my new neighborhood, trying new hobbies, and simply enjoying the act of being alive. Then, 3 months after I'd settled into my new life, I received an unexpected call. It was the realtor who'd handled the sale of my old house. "Mrs. Walker," he said, sounding uncomfortable, "the new owners of your old house are having some issues. They've asked for your contact information. Is it all right if I give them your number?" Curious and a little concerned, I agreed. Shortly after, my phone rang again. This time, it was the new owner, a Mr. Thompson. "Mrs. Walker," he began, his voice tense, "I'm sorry to bother you, but something strange happened today. A young woman tried to break into our house. She tried to use a key at first, then started trying to force the door open. When I confronted her, she became hysterical, screaming that this was her house, that she should inherit it after her mother's death." The blood drained from my face. Mia. It had to be Mia. She thought I was dead and had come to claim her inheritance. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice shaking. I think that might have been my daughter. We've been estranged. She must have assumed." "Your daughter?" He sounded shocked. "But she said you were dead." "I've been very ill, we haven't spoken in months," I explained, not wanting to go into details. "Mr. Thompson, could I ask a favor? If she comes back, would you call me?" He agreed, and we ended the call. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue with my new, peaceful life. But I knew I couldn't. This confrontation had been coming for a long time. It was time to face Mia, to finally say all the things I should have said years ago. The call came sooner than I expected. Just a day after my conversation with Mr. Thompson, my phone rang. "She's here," Mr. Thompson said, his voice tense. "And she's causing quite a scene." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "I'm on my way." The drive to my old house felt surreal. As I pulled up, I could hear the shouting before I even got out of the car. Mia's voice, shrill and angry, carried across the yard. "This is my house," she was screaming at the Thompsons, who stood on the porch looking shocked and frightened. "Get out now." I stepped out of my car, and for a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Mia turned, her eyes landing on me. The look of shock on her face quickly morphed into one of fury. "You," she spat. "You're supposed to be dead." I felt a calm settle over me, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around us. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Mia," I said, my voice steady. Mia's face contorted with rage. "What's going on? Why are these people in our house?" "It's not our house anymore, Mia," I explained. "I sold it." Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in anger. "You can't do that. It was supposed to be mine. I was supposed to inherit it when you died." I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. I'm sorry I inconvenienced you by surviving. Mia's face turned red. You don't understand. I have debts, I need money. I shook my head, acutely aware of the Thompsons and the small crowd of neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle. I don't owe you anything, Mia. You abandoned me when I was fighting for my life. You wished me dead. Why should I help you now? Because you're my mother, she screamed. You're supposed to take care of me. I felt a sadness wash over me, but I stood my ground. No, Mia, not anymore. You're an adult. Your choices, your consequences. Mia's face twisted into an ugly sneer. You know what? Dad was right to leave you. You're useless. It would have been better if you had died. Her words hung in the air, shocking even the onlookers into silence. But this time, they didn't cut me to the core. This time, I felt only pity for the angry, bitter woman my daughter had become. Without another word, I turned and walked back to my car. Before getting in, I addressed the Thompsons. If she comes back or tries to break in again, call the police, I said, gesturing towards Mia. She has no right to be here. As I drove away, I caught a last glimpse of Mia in my rearview mirror, her face a mask of shock and fury. But for the first time, her anger didn't touch me. I was free. In the months that followed, I embraced my new life fully. I took up painting, finding joy in splashing colors across canvas. My health continued to improve, and each day I felt stronger, more alive. Mia never called or tried to contact me again. Sometimes I felt a pang of sadness for the relationship we'd lost, but mostly I felt relief. I had spent so many years trying to fill the bottomless pit of her needs. Now, finally, I was living for myself. I'm Elizabeth, but most people call me Liz or Lizzie. Some even call me Betty, though I've never been fond of that one. I grew up in what you'd call an ordinary family: mom, dad, and my older sister, Kate. Kate's 7 years older than me, and boy, did that make a difference. From the day I can remember, our house was like a shrine to Kate's existence. Every wall had a picture of her first smile, her first steps, or her scribbled drawings that mom and dad treated like Picassos. Me? I was just there. I got used to it, you know? Wearing Kate's hand-me-downs, playing with her old toys. It wasn't great, but I didn't know any different. I just learned to keep quiet and not make a fuss. As the years went by, the pattern continued. Kate got new clothes, I got her old ones. She got the latest toys, I got the ones she'd outgrown. But I never complained. I just existed. High school came and went. Kate had already moved out by then, off to college on a scholarship. I thought maybe now my parents would notice me more, but nope. It was all about Kate's college adventures, Kate's new boyfriend, Kate's future. Then came the big announcement. Kate burst into the house one Sunday afternoon, all smiles and excitement. Mom, Dad, I'm getting married, she squealed. You'd think she'd just announced she'd cured cancer or something. Mom burst into tears, Dad started whooping and hollering. Me? I just sat there, wondering if anyone remembered I was in the room. Kate turned to me, her eyes shining. And Lizzie, you'll be my bridesmaid, right? I nodded, forcing a smile. Sure, Kate. Congratulations. As they all hugged and cried and laughed, I slipped out of the room. No one noticed. They never did. Kate's wedding turned out to be a bigger deal than anyone expected. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones in the kitchen. We'll have to take out a loan, Dad said, his voice strained. Mom sighed. I know, but it's Kate's big day. We can't let her down. I felt a knot form in my stomach. They were going into debt for Kate's wedding? I wanted to say something, to point out how crazy this was, but I knew better. My opinions didn't matter much in this house. The wedding was a lavish affair. Kate looked like a princess, and our parents beamed with pride. I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, feeling invisible as always. After the honeymoon, Kate dropped another bombshell. "I've decided to be a housewife," she announced over Sunday dinner. "Jack makes enough for both of us." Mom and Dad exchanged glances. I could see the worry in their eyes, but they plastered on smiles. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said. "If that's what makes you happy." I wanted to scream. They'd taken out a loan for her wedding, and now she wasn't even going to work. But I kept my mouth shut, pushing my food around my plate. It wasn't long before Kate was pregnant. With twins, no less. Our parents went absolutely nuts. "Twins?" Dad kept saying, shaking his head in wonder. "Can you believe it?" I could believe it. I could also believe what came next. "We should help them buy a house," Mom suggested one night. "They'll need the space with 2 babies on the way." Dad nodded. "We could make the down payment on a mortgage. There's that nice place not far from here." I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Are you serious?" I blurted out. "You're already in debt from the wedding, and now you want to buy them a house?" They both looked at me like they'd forgotten I was there. Maybe they had. "Elizabeth," Mom said, her voice stern. "This is what family does. We help each other." The twins were born a few months later. 2 little boys, cute as buttons. Mom and Dad were over the moon, spending every free moment at Kate's new house, cooing over the babies. Meanwhile, I was finishing up high school, trying to figure out my next steps. College was the obvious choice, but how was I going to pay for it? One night, I worked up the courage to ask. "Mom, Dad, I've been looking at colleges." "That's nice, dear," Mom said, not looking up from the photo album of the twins she was putting together. I was wondering, could you help me with tuition? They exchanged that look again. The one that said they'd rather be talking about anything else. "Well, sweetie," Dad started, "we'd love to help, but with the loan for Kate's wedding and helping with the house." "We can cover half," Mom jumped in. "But you'll need to figure out the rest on your own." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Half? That's all they could do? After everything they'd done for Kate? But I knew arguing was pointless. "Okay," I said, my voice small. "Thanks." As I walked back to my room, I heard them resume their conversation about the twins' latest accomplishments. I closed my door, leaned against it, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I'd managed to get into the local community college, not my dream school, but the only one I could afford with my parents' measly contribution. To make up the difference, I landed a part-time job at a nearby diner. Let me tell you, waiting tables, while trying to keep up with college coursework, is no picnic. I'd drag myself home most nights, dead on my feet, dreaming of my bed. But even that small comfort was often yanked away from me. It started one Friday evening. I'd just finished a brutal shift and was looking forward to face planting into my pillow when I walked in to find Kate in our living room, the twins crawling around her feet. "Oh, Lizzie," she exclaimed. "Thank God you're here. I'm at my wit's end with these two. Mind watching them for a bit? Jack and I haven't had a date night in ages." Before I could even open my mouth, she was out the door, leaving me with 2 screaming 3-year-olds. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring at my nephews. Don't get me wrong, I love the little terrors, but this wasn't what I signed up for. Mom wandered in from the kitchen. "Your sister is exhausted. This is what family does. Besides, it'll be good practice for when you have your own kids." I wanted to scream. Kids? I was barely keeping my head above water as it was. This became a regular occurrence. Every weekend, without fail, Kate would show up, drop off the twins, and disappear. Sometimes she'd claim she had errands. Other times, she and Jack would go catch a movie or grab dinner. And every time, I'd end up playing babysitter. One Saturday, after a particularly hellish week of exams, I'd had enough. Kate had just breezed out the door, leaving the twins mid-tantrum. "Mom, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't fair. I'm exhausted, I work, I study, and now I'm expected to give up my weekends too." Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "Lizzie, your sister needs the help. You should be glad to do it." "But what about what I need?" I protested. "I'm running myself ragged here." Mom sighed. "Elizabeth, don't be selfish. Kate has 2 children to look after. You don't know how hard that is." I gave up. It was clear they weren't going to listen. So I resigned myself to my fate, classes during the week, work in the evenings, and unpaid babysitting on the weekends. Personal life? Huh. That was a joke. The closest thing I had to a social life was making small talk with customers at the diner. Dates? Forget about it. Between work, study, and the twins, I barely had time to shower, let alone meet someone. I was at my breaking point. The constant juggle of work, school, and forced babysitting had left me drained, both physically and mentally. I needed a break, a real one, away from everything and everyone. So, I made a decision. "Mom, Dad," I announced one evening, "I'm taking a few days off. Going to the beach." Their reaction surprised me. For once, they actually seemed happy for me. "That's wonderful, Lizzie," Mom exclaimed. "Where are you going?" I told them about the cheap motel I'd found online, right by the ocean. Nothing fancy, but it was all I could afford. Dad nodded approvingly. "Good for you, kiddo, you deserve a break." I almost fell over from shock. Was this really happening? Were they actually acknowledging my needs for once? The day finally came. I packed my bag, hopped on a bus, and felt the weight lifting off my shoulders with every mile that passed. When I finally arrived at the coast, I couldn't believe my luck. The motel was small and a bit run down, but the ocean view was spectacular. I dropped my bag in the room and headed straight for the beach. The salty air filled my lungs, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I treated myself to lunch at a cute little seaside cafe, savoring every bite. No screaming kids, no homework, no customers to please. Just me, my thoughts, and the sound of the waves. As the sun started to set, I headed back to the motel, already planning my evening of peaceful solitude. But as I approached my room, I heard familiar voices. "Surprise, Lizzie!" I froze. There, standing outside the room next to mine, were Mom and Kate, with the twins running circles around their legs. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, my heart sinking. "We couldn't let you be all alone on your vacation," Mom chirped. "So we decided to join you. We're right next door." I noticed their suitcases outside one of the nicer rooms. Of course, they'd splurged on themselves while I was in the budget option. Before I could process what was happening, Kate was pushing the twins towards me. "The boys have been dying to see the ocean. You don't mind watching them for a bit, do you?" "I want to take a walk on the beach." "And I need to run to the store," Mom added. "We'll be back soon." Just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing there with 2 overexcited 3-year-olds tugging at my hands. What followed was the worst vacation of my life. The twins were out of control, tearing around my small room like tornadoes. They ripped the curtains, broke glasses, and somehow managed to clog the toilet with apples. I had to shell out money I didn't have for repairs and to call a plumber. By the end of the weekend, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been. The final straw came when Kate had the audacity to complain about how tired she was from all the traveling. I lost it. The argument that followed was epic. I yelled, Mom cried, Kate sulked, and the twins screamed through it all. I packed my bags that night and caught the first bus home in the morning. As I watched the coastline disappear behind me, I felt something shift inside. This couldn't go on. Something had to change. I dragged myself through the front door, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. Dad was in his usual spot, eyes glued to the TV. He barely grunted a hello as I passed. I crashed into bed that night, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and half-formed plans. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I was halfway through packing my suitcase when I heard the front door slam. Mom's voice rang out, sharp and irritated. "Elizabeth, where are you?" She appeared in my doorway, face flushed with anger. "I can't believe you just left us there. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to manage the twins on our own?" I bit back a retort about how I managed the twins on my own all the time. Instead, I just kept packing. Mom's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm moving out, I need my own life." Their reactions were immediate and predictable. "How can you be so selfish?" Mom cried. "After everything we've done for you." Dad's face turned red. "You ungrateful girl. Have you thought about your sister? Who's going to help her with the twins?" I felt something snap inside me. My sister? What about me? When has anyone in this family ever thought about what I need? "Elizabeth," Mom gasped. "No, I'm serious," I pressed on. "Kate has a husband. Let him help with the kids. I need to focus on my own life." "You listen here, young lady," Dad growled. "If you walk out that door, don't expect us to keep paying for your college. You'll be on your own." I looked at them both, these people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. In that moment, I realized they were strangers to me. "Fine," I said, zipping up my suitcase. "I'd rather be on my own than live like this. No personal life, no time for myself, just constant demands and screaming kids. I'm done." I pushed past them, dragging my suitcase down the stairs. They followed, still shouting, but I tuned them out. As I reached for the door handle, Mom made one last attempt. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Then, without looking back, I opened the door and stepped out into the unknown. The next few weeks were a blur. I crashed on a classmate's couch while scrambling to find a more permanent solution. Eventually, I connected with a girl from my study group who was also looking for a roommate. We found a tiny apartment that we could just barely afford between the two of us. With my parents cutting me off financially, I had to pick up more shifts at the diner. I was working almost full-time on top of my classes. There were nights I thought I wouldn't make it, when the exhaustion was so deep I could barely think straight. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I felt free. No one was making demands on my time. No one was guilting me into babysitting or putting their needs before my own. The apartment was small, my bed was a mattress on the floor, but it was mine. I threw myself into my studies with a determination I didn't know I possessed. Every all-nighter, every missed social event, every extra shift, it was all working towards my goal. My future. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. As I sat in the auditorium on graduation day, waiting for my name to be called, I scanned the crowd. A small part of me hoped to see a familiar face, Mom, Dad, even Kate. But the seats I'd reserved remained empty. Life after college was like stepping into a whole new world. I landed a job at a marketing firm, and suddenly, I had a steady income that wasn't just scraping by. For the first time in years, I could breathe easy. I rented my own apartment, nothing fancy, but it was all mine. No roommates, no family drama, just peace and quiet. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I started doing all those normal things I'd missed out on before. I went on dates, made new friends, even had a couple of short-lived relationships. Nothing serious, but it was fun to just be young and carefree for once. My parents? They were still in the picture, but barely. We'd talk maybe once a month, stilted conversations full of awkward silences and thinly veiled disapproval. They were still sore about me moving out, and I wasn't exactly rushing to mend fences. Then came my 25th birthday. I had plans with friends, nothing wild, just dinner and drinks. But a week before, I got a call from Mom. "Elizabeth," she said, her voice oddly cheerful, "we want you to come over for your birthday. The whole family will be there." Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like stepping back in time. Kate and her husband were there, the twins, now 7 years old, running around like little tornadoes. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins milled about, all smiles and hugs. "Happy birthday, Lizzie," they chorused as I walked in. I plastered on a smile, accepting hugs and well wishes. Then came the gifts. Most were typical: clothes, books, gift cards. But then Mom handed me an envelope with a flourish. "This is from all of us," she said, beaming. I opened it, my stomach sinking as I saw what was inside. A ticket to a beach resort. "We're all going," Dad announced proudly. "A big family vacation. We've paid for everything." I froze. A family vacation with the twins? It was my ruined beach trip all over again. I opened my mouth to refuse, but Mom squeezed my arm, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare make a scene. Not in front of everyone." So I smiled and thanked them, all the while screaming internally. The party wound down, relatives trickled out, and finally, it was just us, me, Mom, Dad, Kate, and her family. That's when I let loose. "I'm not going," I said flatly. "What?" Kate gasped. "But it's a family trip." "Exactly," I replied. "And I'm not interested in spending my vacation babysitting your kids again." Kate burst into tears. "You don't love us at all, do you? You don't care about your nephews?" "I care about them just fine," I snapped. "But if I wanted kids, I'd have my own." The argument went round and round. Mom called me ungrateful, Dad looked disappointed, Kate kept crying. They all tried to guilt me, to pressure me into giving in. "Fine," I said finally, my voice tired. "I'll go." They all looked relieved, like they'd won some great victory. But they had no idea what was coming. The day of departure arrived, and I found myself at the airport, surrounded by my overly cheerful family. Kate and her husband were practically bouncing with excitement, already making plans for all the alone time they'd have while I watched the twins. "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Lizzie," Kate told the boys, winking at me. "She'll take you to the beach, build sandcastles, maybe even go snorkeling." Mom and Dad were beaming too, going on about how nice it would be for Kate to have a break. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do on this vacation. It was clear they all saw me as nothing more than a convenient babysitter. As we approached the check-in counter, I made my move. "Oh," I exclaimed, feigning discomfort. "I need to use the restroom." "You guys go ahead and check in. I'll meet you at the gate." They nodded, distracted by wrangling luggage and excited children. I watched them join the queue, then turned and walked briskly in the opposite direction. My heart was pounding as I approached a different check-in counter. I handed over my passport and the ticket I'd bought weeks ago, a flight to a small, peaceful island resort. Once through security, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. My hand shook slightly as I typed out a message to Mom, "I'm not coming with you, I'm going on my own vacation. Enjoy your trip." I hit send and immediately turned off my phone, not wanting to deal with the fallout just yet. I could almost hear the explosion of anger and disbelief that would be happening at the other check-in counter. As I settled into my seat on the plane, I turned my phone back on briefly. It immediately exploded with notifications, missed calls, voicemails, angry texts. I listened to one voicemail from Mom, her voice shrill and furious. "Elizabeth Morgan. How dare you abandon your family like this? You've ruined everything. Your sister is in tears, her husband is furious, they were counting on you to watch the boys. And I had plans. You are the most selfish, ungrateful." As the plane took off, I sipped my champagne and gazed out the window. The guilt was still there, a small knot in my stomach. I knew I'd have to deal with the fallout eventually. There would be angry phone calls, tearful accusations, probably another round of being called selfish and ungrateful. But overwhelmingly, I felt free. Light. Like I could finally breathe. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was going on a trip that was just for me. No obligations, no babysitting, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and whatever I decided I wanted to do. As the plane touched down on the small, tropical island, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The warm breeze that greeted me as I stepped off the plane seemed to whisper, "Welcome to freedom." I checked into my resort, a modest but charming place right on the beach. As I unpacked, curiosity got the better of me, and I turned on my phone. Instantly, it exploded with notifications. Hundreds of text messages, missed calls, and voicemails flooded in. With a mix of amusement and trepidation, I scrolled through some of the messages. "How could you do this to us, Mom? You ruined everything, Kate. You're so selfish, Elizabeth, Dad." I couldn't help but smile. For once, I had chosen myself over their demands. I turned the phone off again and tossed it into the hotel safe. For the next week, I was unreachable. And what a week it was. I lounged on the beach, read books uninterrupted, went snorkeling, and even tried my hand at surfing. I chatted with other vacationers, went on a few casual dates, and stayed out as late as I wanted. No schedule, no responsibilities, no screaming kids. Just me and the rhythm of the waves. All too soon, it was time to head home. I returned to my apartment tanned, rested, and more centered than I'd felt in years. But the real world was waiting to intrude on my newfound peace. The very next day, there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Mom and Kate, faces red with anger. "How dare you?" Mom screeched, barging in without invitation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kate wasn't far behind. "You ruined our entire vacation." The boys were devastated. They launched into a tirade, their voices overlapping as they hurled accusations and insults. I was selfish, ungrateful, a terrible daughter and sister. I owed them for the ticket they'd bought me, for the vacation I'd ruined, for the childcare I'd failed to provide. I let them rant for a few minutes, their words washing over me without sticking. Then, calmly but firmly, I spoke. "That's enough," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "I don't owe you anything. Not money, not childcare, not my time. I'm an adult, and I get to make my own choices." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I'm not discussing this further. Please leave. When you're ready to treat me with respect and have a calm conversation, we can talk. Until then, I think it's best we don't communicate." They stared at me, shocked into silence. Then, with a few more choice words, they stormed out. As the door slammed behind them, I let out a long breath. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Over the next few weeks, I made some big changes. I found a new apartment in a different part of town and moved without telling my family my new address. I threw myself into my work and picked up some new hobbies, painting, yoga, even started learning a new language. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, pangs of guilt. But every time I came home to my peaceful apartment, every time I made plans without worrying about babysitting duties, every time I pursued a new interest just because I wanted to, I knew I'd made the right choice. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday, my family and I will find a way to have a healthy relationship. Maybe not. But I do know this, I'll face whatever comes on my own terms, standing tall and unapologetic in the life I've chosen for myself. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, my life was pretty straightforward. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, still works as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary. They gave me everything they could, but we were never wealthy. I'm Tasha Mitchell. Well, I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After graduating from college with an accounting degree, I landed a job at Anderson & Partners, a mid-sized accounting firm. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing to get my morning coffee before work, and he was heading to some important meeting. My coffee spilled all over his obviously expensive suit, and I wanted to die right there. "I'm so sorry," I started dabbing at his jacket with napkins. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." Instead of getting angry, he laughed. "Don't worry about it. Though you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight." That dinner turned into another, and another. Marcus was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But he never made me feel less than him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he called it. That all changed when he took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget Victoria Reynolds looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "So, Tasha," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Marcus tells us you're an accountant?" "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How practical," she said with a thin smile. "And your parents?" When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you'd think I'd said they were professional criminals. James Reynolds barely looked at me during dinner, speaking only to Marcus about work. When he proposed 3 months later, I said yes without hesitation. His parents attended our wedding with frozen smiles and stiff congratulations. I thought I could win them over with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Marcus was ecstatic, spinning me around our massive living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James seemed to soften a little at the news, though Victoria couldn't resist saying, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., Marcus insisted on naming him after his father, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered, not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries parties about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ, as we called him, was perfect. Those first 2 years were actually good. Marcus took to fatherhood like a natural, coming home early to play with JJ, reading him bedtime stories, taking us both to the park on weekends. He was thriving as financial director at Reynolds Industries, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ and our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they doted on their grandson, showering him with expensive gifts and demanding regular visits. But somewhere around JJ's 3rd birthday, things started to change. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse, "Big project at work, honey." You wouldn't understand. The man who used to rush home to see his son now barely made it for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her Hermes scarf perfectly arranged, despite the wind outside. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" I stared at her, confused. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha." "The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" I waited up that night, sitting in our dark living room until Marcus came home at 11:30. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. You're too simple for these events. The other executives' wives, they know how to carry themselves. They can discuss art and wine and summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you talk about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's adventures in the school cafeteria?" I felt like he'd slapped me. "I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed." I was proud, Tasha. When we were dating, your simplicity was charming. But I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more. I went to bed crying that night, telling myself he was just stressed from work, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus had texted that he was working late again, and I was doing my usual cleaning routine around the apartment. When I got to his home office, I noticed his laptop was open on his desk, screen still bright. I'd never snooped before, I trusted him, despite everything. But something made me pause this time. Maybe it was the way the screen showed his email was open, or maybe I was just tired of all the lies. I sat down at his desk, and that's when I saw it, an email thread with someone named Sophia Loran. My hand shook as I started reading. There were hundreds of messages between them, going back months. Sophia was apparently a new marketing executive at Reynolds Industries, hired about a year ago. As I scrolled through their correspondence, my stomach turned. Had dinner with the village idiot again, Marcus had written. God, I can't believe I have to go home to her. Sophia's response, poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tomorrow. They talked about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who didn't know her husband was sleeping with someone else. There were pictures of jewelry he'd bought her, weekend trips they'd taken while he'd told me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus finally came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and his tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. Care to explain? I asked, holding up one of the printed emails. How could you do this to me, to our family? He laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not, sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around. Look, he said, pouring himself a coffee like we were discussing the weather, here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife, on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey, he added with a nasty grin, maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally. If you're lucky. I ran to JJ's room, my hands shaking as I threw some clothes into a backpack. JJ was still sleeping, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him up. Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go? I picked up my son, grabbed the backpack and my purse with the USB drive, and walked past Marcus without a word. Through tears, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after I left. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them to my parents' front door, wearing a satisfied smirk. I always knew you weren't good enough for my son, she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But what came next was worse than anything I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming I was an unfit mother, painting a picture of me that was completely false. Your Honor, Marcus's expensive lawyer said during our first hearing, Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. She drinks heavily, creates scenes of jealousy without cause, and has become unstable. Thank God I'd saved all that evidence. When my lawyer presented the email correspondence between Marcus and Sophia, showing his infidelity and his cruel comments about me, the judge's expression changed. The timestamps on the emails proved I hadn't been creating scenes. I hadn't even known about the affair until I found those messages. So, Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, reviewing the evidence, you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving her, gaslighting her? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus getting every other weekend and substantial child support payments. I went back to work full-time at my accounting firm, while Mom and Dad helped with JJ. They were amazing, turning their retirement years into full-time grandparent duty without a single complaint. We settled into a routine. It wasn't luxury living anymore, but it was honest and peaceful. Then came that Saturday morning when a black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, and with him was Sophia, tall, blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I'm here to see my son," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the house. Sophia followed, her nose wrinkled as she looked around our living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. "Oh my God," she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. "This place is literally a dump. Like an actual kennel." "Watch your mouth," I warned her. She turned to Marcus. "Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people?" She gestured toward my parents, who stood shocked in the doorway. "They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising a Reynolds heir." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my parents' house right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You know what, Tasha? I'm done playing nice. I'm going to take JJ, and I'm going to destroy you. You think you won in court? Just wait." I shoved them both toward the door. "Get out." "Come on, baby," Sophia purred to Marcus. "This place probably has fleas anyway." As they drove away, I hugged my parents tight. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But watching that Range Rover disappear down our street, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You know, sweetheart," he said, sitting down across from me, "sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator. Real thorough guy, knows how to dig deep without leaving traces." I thought about Sophia's smug face, about her cruel words about my parents, about all the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she'd commented on my LinkedIn profile photo, "Look at this pathetic wannabe. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore?" Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email had read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." "How much does Mike charge?" I asked Dad. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small office downtown with Mike Sullivan, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed. I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant stream of harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. "You need to come to my office," he said. "You're going to want to see this in person." The file he handed me was thick. "First off," he said, "Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson." As I read through the file, my hands started shaking. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, moving from rich man to rich man, living off their money until they got tired of her or discovered her small-time scams. She'd had different names in different cities, always disappearing just before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. "Look at these bank transfers," Mike pointed out. "She's been siphoning money from company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. And these emails?" He showed me screenshots. "She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors. Product launches, merger plans, everything." I sat back, my mind racing. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist. And she'd gotten her hooks into not just my husband, but the entire Reynolds empire. "There's one more thing," Mike said, pulling out another folder. "Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline." I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't make a move. Not yet. Because now I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call from Victoria came on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was as cold as ever. Tasha, James's 60th birthday party is this Saturday, she said, like she was scheduling a root canal. While we'd prefer to keep this a family-only affair, JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. And since he's too young to come alone. She let the sentence hang there. Just remember, you're only being invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. The party starts at 7. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was exactly as ostentatious as you'd expect. The mansion was decked out in gold and crystal, with waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental stare as JJ and I walked in. "Oh, you came," Victoria said, her smile tight. "Well, JJ darling, come give grandmother a kiss." I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like a show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse containing Mike's file, waiting. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She was wearing a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. "Everyone," Marcus announced, clinking his glass. "I have an announcement to make." He pulled Sophia closer. "I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren. She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring." Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally. A woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard educated, from a wonderful family. "Unlike some people," James added, shooting me a look. Sophia preened under their attention. "I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family. And I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves." That was my cue. I stood up, my hand steady as I pulled out the file. "Speaking of what people deserve," I said loudly, "I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds." "Tasha," Marcus warned, "don't make a scene." I pulled out the first document. "Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson? How's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity?" The color drained from Sophia's face. "What is she talking about?" Victoria demanded. "Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's identity? The real Sophia Loren is a schoolteacher in Minnesota. This woman," I pointed at her, "is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist." "She's lying," Sophia shrieked, but I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. "And here's my personal favorite," I continued, pulling out more documents. "Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails, she's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp for months." James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. "The Wagner deal, the Collins merger, it was you?" "I can explain," Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. "The real Carla Larson," I said, enjoying every moment, "has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room had gone deadly quiet. I watched their faces change as they read through the evidence, Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. And Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos within minutes. James Reynolds's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he read through the evidence. "Get out," he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer excuses. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here." "James, darling," she attempted, reaching for his arm. "These are all lies, I can explain everything." "Explain?" He shook the documents at her. "Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal? That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins? They were our biggest competitor, and you've been feeding them everything." Victoria, who'd been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up with pure venom in her eyes. "You common prostitute," she hissed. "You thought you could con your way into our family?" Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. "Marcus, baby, tell them." But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at the photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. "If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, "I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way." After Sophia fled, James turned to his son. The party guests were pretending to be absorbed in their champagne, but everyone was watching. "You brought this woman into our company," James said. "Gave her access to confidential information. All because what? She was pretty? Had nice legs?" "Dad, I didn't know." "Exactly," James roared. "You didn't know? Didn't check? Just thought with your..." He glanced at JJ and modified his language, "with everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow." "But Dad..." "And that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live." Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. "Tasha," she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. "We owe you an apology. A significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage." James nodded solemnly. "We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than..." He glanced at Marcus, others. 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers found once they started looking, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment, not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company from Sophia's schemes. "The least we could do," James had said, handing me the keys. "After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. JJ's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did." Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ's still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and, surprisingly, for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips about growing roses. "Sarah," Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, "you and Tom raised a remarkable daughter." I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." "We always knew what Tasha was capable of," Mom replied with quiet dignity. "Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay." Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. "Do you miss Daddy?" he asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are." Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come. From the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned, to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better. The earliest memory I have of my mother is the scent of her lavender perfume. I was 4 years old when she died, but that fragrance still haunts me, especially on quiet nights when I'm alone in my room, trying to piece together the fragments of our brief time together. My name is Chloe, and this is the story of how I lost 2 families and found myself. I don't remember much from the weeks after Mom died. Most of my time was spent at my grandparents' house, a cozy 2-story home that would later play a crucial role in my life. Grandma Martha and Grandpa Joe tried their best to shield me from the pain, keeping me occupied with cookies and stories while Dad handled the funeral arrangements. 1 year passed in a blur of transitions between Dad's house and my grandparents'. I didn't realize it then, but looking back, I can see how Dad was gradually pulling away, spending less time with me and more time elsewhere. I'd hear snippets of adult worry, words like too soon and moving on, but I was too young to understand their significance. I was 5 when Dad brought home the news that would change everything. I remember sitting on our worn living room couch, my small legs barely reaching the edge, when he walked in with a woman I'd seen a few times before. She had long brown hair and a kind smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Chloe, honey," Dad said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that even my young mind detected, "this is Linda. We got married last weekend, and she's going to be your new mom." I stared at Linda's stomach, which showed a noticeable bump under her flowered dress. Dad followed my gaze and added, "And you're going to have a baby sister soon. Isn't that exciting?" The word exciting hung in the air like a lead balloon. Linda stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "I know this is a lot to take in, Chloe. But I promise we'll make it work." I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because it seemed like the thing to do. I retreated to my room that night and pulled out the only photo I had of my mom showing her holding me as a baby, both of us laughing at something off camera. I touched her face gently, trying to remember the sound of her laugh. It was strange watching Dad transform into a different person. The man who used to spend weekends taking me to the park now spent his time painting the nursery and attending birthing classes with Linda. I tried not to mind, really, I did. After all, Linda wasn't unkind to me. She'd drive me to school in her blue Honda, ask about my day, and make sure I had everything I needed. But there was always something temporary about her attention, like she was babysitting rather than parenting. I'd catch her absent-mindedly rubbing her growing belly while I told her about my day at school, her eyes glazed with thoughts of her own baby. "Linda, can we get ice cream?" I asked one afternoon after school. "Not today, sweetie. I need to rest, the baby's been kicking all day," she replied, heading straight for the couch. It became a common response, "Not today, maybe later, another time." Then Emma arrived. I remember the day Dad brought them home from the hospital. He was carrying this tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, his face glowing with a pride I'd never seen before, not even in the photos of him holding me as a baby. "Chloe, meet your baby sister, Emma," he announced, his voice soft with wonder. I stood on my tiptoes to peek at the red-faced infant. "Hi, Emma," I whispered, trying to sound like the responsible big sister I was supposed to be. That's when everything changed. Suddenly, there were new rules in the house, all revolving around Emma. "Chloe, please don't run in the house, Emma's sleeping." "Chloe, can you help fold these clothes while I feed Emma?" "Not so loud, honey. You'll upset your sister." I became a shadow in my own home, tiptoeing around, trying to make myself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. My responsibilities grew while my privileges shrank. I learned to clean bottles, fold tiny clothes, and tidy up toys that weren't mine. One day, I came home from school to find Dad and Linda cooing over Emma, who was playing with a brand new tablet designed for babies. "Look how smart she is," Linda exclaimed as Emma randomly hit the screen. "She's going to be a genius." I glanced down at my worn-out sneakers, remembering how Dad had said we couldn't afford new ones this month. But here was Emma, barely able to walk, with the latest educational gadgets scattered around her. The pattern continued. Emma got designer clothes from the mall while I got hand-me-downs from our cousins. She had a room full of the latest toys while I still treasured the stuffed bear my mom had given me, now missing an eye and patched in several places. It wasn't that they were cruel. They remembered to feed me, clothe me, send me to school. But it was always an afterthought, like checking off a box on a to-do list. The only time they seemed to really notice me was when Grandma and Grandpa visited. "Chloe needs new clothes," Grandma would point out, and suddenly Dad would remember to take me shopping. "Don't you think Chloe might like that new book series all the kids are reading?" Grandpa would suggest, and magically, the books would appear. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I kept my room clean, did my homework without being asked, and helped with Emma whenever they needed me. I thought if I was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they'd remember I was their daughter too. When Emma started walking and talking, I thought things would get better. I imagined us becoming best friends, sharing secrets, and playing together like the sisters I saw on TV. I even decorated half of my room with welcome signs the day she was old enough to string full sentences together. "Want to play dolls with me, Emma?" I asked hopefully one afternoon. She looked at me with those calculating eyes that seemed too old for her 4-year-old face. "No, I want your dollhouse." "But that's mine. Grandma gave it to me for Christmas," I protested. Emma's response was to march straight to Dad and Linda, her face scrunching up in that familiar way that meant trouble for me. "Daddy, Chloe won't share her toys with me," she wailed, tears appearing on command. "Chloe," Dad's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Stop being selfish and let your sister play with your toys." That was just the beginning. Soon, Emma figured out she could take anything of mine she wanted. My art supplies, my books, even my clothes, nothing was off limits. When I tried to get them back, it always ended the same way. "Mom, Chloe's being mean again." "John, tell your daughter to stop bothering Emma." But the toy snatching was just the warm-up. Emma developed a talent for setting traps that would get me in trouble. Like the time she deliberately spilled juice on her new dress and told our parents I'd pushed her. Or when she broke her tablet and claimed I'd done it out of jealousy. Each time, I'd try to defend myself. "That's not what happened. She's lying." And each time, Dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Stop trying to get attention, Chloe. Go to your room." My only refuge was at my grandparents' house. They saw through Emma's act and weren't afraid to say so. "John," Grandpa would say to Dad during Sunday dinners, his voice firm but tired, "you need to treat your daughters equally." "We do treat them equally," Linda would snap back. "But Chloe is just difficult. Always causing problems, always fighting with Emma. While Emma is such a sweet, well-behaved child." I'd sit there, pushing food around my plate, as Grandma's voice would rise. "Open your eyes. That sweet child of yours is manipulating everyone in this house. You're raising a little con artist, and you can't even see it." "Mother, please," Dad would try to intervene. "You're being unfair to Emma." "Unfair?" Grandpa would scoff. "What's unfair is watching you two spoil one child rotten while treating the other like she's invisible. That's what's unfair." But it was like talking to a wall. Dad and Linda had their narrative about their perfect younger daughter and their problematic older one, and nothing could shake it, not even the truth staring them in the face. Senior year should have been exciting, full of dreams about college and future plans. Instead, I found myself constantly worried about whether I'd even get to go. One night, as I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water, I heard whispers that made me stop in my tracks. "John, it doesn't make sense." Linda's voice was hushed but intense. "The tuition money for Chloe, we could use it for Emma instead. Get her into that private high school she wants, and later, a better college." My heart stopped. They were talking about my college fund, the money Mom and Dad had started saving before I was even born. "I can't," Dad replied, his voice weak. "I promised Sarah. Before she..." I promised her I'd make sure Chloe got an education. Sarah's been dead for 14 years. Linda's whisper turned sharp. You can't let promises to a dead woman control our lives forever. Emma deserves the best education we can give her. There was a long pause before Dad spoke again. My parents would disinherit me if I did that. You know how they are about Chloe. My legs felt weak. So that was it. The only reason Dad was keeping his promise to Mom was fear of losing his inheritance. Not love for me, not respect for Mom's memory, just money. Fine, Linda spat. But I think it's ridiculous we're spending so much on her when Emma could use it better. I slipped back to my room without the water, my throat too tight to swallow anyway. Graduation came and went. I got accepted to the local college's graphic design program, which meant I could live at home and save money. Grandma and Grandpa surprised me with a top-of-the-line laptop at my graduation party. This is for all those A's you earned, sweetheart, Grandpa said, hugging me tight. You'll need it for your design work. I was over the moon. Finally, I had professional-grade equipment for my studies. But my excitement was tempered by transportation concerns. The campus was across town, and I hoped Dad might let me use his old Honda now that he had a new car. Dad? I approached him one evening. About getting to college. We can't afford another car, Chloe, he cut me off before I could finish. The tuition payments are already stretching us thin. You'll have to take the bus. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. But just 2 days later, I overheard them in the living room. I think the red Mercedes would be perfect for Emma's Sweet 16, Linda was saying. She'll be learning to drive soon, and it's such a safe car for a new driver. Isn't it a bit expensive? Dad asked, but I could hear the smile in his voice. Only the best for our little princess, Linda replied. We can start saving now, she'll be 16 before we know it. I stood there, my bus pass clutched in my hand, thinking about the hour-long commute I'd be making each way while they planned to buy my 14-year-old sister a luxury car. 2 years into college, life had fallen into a predictable routine of classes, bus rides, and trying to stay invisible at home. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Chloe? Grandma's voice sounded strained. Could you come visit us this weekend? Your grandfather's had a bit of trouble with his heart, and we need to talk to you about something important. That Saturday, I found myself sitting in their familiar living room, the same place where I'd found refuge so many times during my childhood. Grandpa looked pale, but was sitting up in his armchair, Grandma perched on the armrest beside him. They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read, then Grandma took a deep breath. Chloe, dear, we need to tell you something. After your grandfather's heart attack, we've done a lot of thinking about the future. We're getting old, sweetheart, Grandpa continued. And maintaining this house is becoming too much for us. We've decided to move to Pine Grove Nursing Home. The tears came before I could stop them. But. Now, Grandma moved to sit beside me, pulling me into a hug that smelled of her signature lavender perfume, so similar to Mom's. We'll have excellent care there. And you can visit anytime you want. I'll come every weekend, I promised through my tears. They both laughed, the sound warming the room. You most certainly will not, Grandpa declared. You're young. You should be out with friends, living your life, maybe meeting a nice boy. Then their faces grew serious again. Grandpa leaned forward in his chair. There's something else we need to tell you. We've spent about half our savings on securing our place at Pine Grove. The rest will go to the family after we're gone. I started to protest that I didn't want to talk about this, but he held up his hand. But the house, he continued, we've already taken care of that. We've registered it in your name, Chloe. This house belongs to you now. It's all legal and official. My head spun. Does Dad know? Grandpa's face hardened slightly. It's none of his business. This was our house to give, and we chose to give it to you. But, I looked around at the familiar walls, the photos spanning generations, the corner where I used to hide during hide and seek. Why? Because we're not blind, Grandma said softly. And we want to make sure you're taken care of. I sat there, stunned, looking at these two people who had always been my strongest supporters, who had seen me when everyone else looked past me. I won't tell them, I whispered, understanding instinctively that this needed to stay secret for now. Grandpa nodded approvingly. Good girl. What's done is done, and it's no one's business but ours. 2 weeks passed in a blur of helping Grandma and Grandpa move to Pine Grove. The day they handed Dad the keys to their house, I felt my stomach twist. He had no idea those keys weren't really his to take. This is wonderful, Linda gushed, already planning renovations in her head. No more rent. We can finally have a real family home. They wasted no time moving us in. I watched silently as Linda walked through each room, her nose wrinkling at the vintage furniture and familiar decorations that held so many of my childhood memories. This place needs a complete overhaul, she declared, running a finger along Grandma's antique sideboard. And a deep clean. For now, the girls can share the blue room upstairs, it's the only one properly habitable. My heart sank. Share a room with Emma? At 16, she'd become even more impossible than before. As if on cue, Emma's shrill voice filled the house. I am not sharing a room with her, she screamed, stamping her foot on Grandma's hardwood floors. This isn't fair. I deserve the master bedroom. Why should I be stuck with her? Make her sleep in the closet or the basement or whatever. I don't care. I stood there, clutching a box of my belongings, as Emma's tantrum escalated. The familiar headache that came with her screaming started to pulse behind my eyes. I hate this. I hate this house. I hate having to share anything with her. I'd learned long ago that there was no point in arguing. Without a word, I carried my box upstairs to the blue room, the same room where I used to sleep during weekend visits with Grandma and Grandpa. I set my laptop on the old desk by the window, placed a few books beside it, and left for my afternoon classes. The whole bus ride to campus, I tried to focus on my upcoming design project, but Emma's words kept echoing in my head. She'd gotten worse over the years, if that was possible. More entitled, more cruel, more calculating. When I returned that evening, the house was quiet. Dad and Linda's voices drifted up from the kitchen, but there was no sign of Emma. I climbed the stairs to our shared room, my footsteps silent on the carpet runner Grandma had installed years ago. The moment I opened the door, my world stopped. My laptop, my beautiful graduation gift from Grandma and Grandpa, my lifeline for my design work, lay shattered on the floor. The screen was cracked beyond repair, the case bent and broken. Emma sat on her bed, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips as she watched my face crumple. What did you do? My voice came out as a whisper, then rose to a shout. What did you do? Oops, she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. Accidents happen. But go ahead, try telling them. We both know who they'll believe. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. I did it on purpose, and there's nothing you can do about it. Something inside me snapped. All the years of being pushed aside, ignored, gaslight, it all came rushing up like a tidal wave. Before I knew what I was doing, I lunged at Emma, my vision blurred with tears of rage. You spoiled, entitled little brat, I screamed, grabbing her shoulders. She shrieked, not her usual calculated cry for attention, but a genuine sound of surprise. We tumbled onto the floor, years of pent-up frustration finally exploding. Help! She's crazy! Help! Emma screamed, while I kept shouting about all the times she'd destroyed my things, lied about me, made my life miserable. Dad and Linda burst into the room, Dad pulling me off Emma, while Linda rushed to cradle her precious daughter. Look! I pointed at my shattered laptop, my voice breaking. Look what she did. Grandma and Grandpa's graduation gift, she destroyed it on purpose. She admitted it. Emma's face transformed instantly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched Linda. It was an accident. I just bumped into the desk, I didn't mean to. And then she attacked me like a wild animal. You evil, horrible girl. Linda shrieked at me, her face contorted with rage. How dare you attack my daughter? John, I want her out of this house. Now. She's dangerous. I turned to Dad, desperately hoping he'd finally see through Emma's act. But his face was hard, closed off. Pack your things, he said coldly. And get out. The words hit me like physical blows. Why? I whispered, then found my voice. Why do you always choose them? What happened to the dad who used to love me? Who promised Mom he'd take care of me? His face reddened with anger. Don't you dare bring your mother into this. You want to know the truth? You've been nothing but a burden since she died. A constant reminder of a past I wanted to forget. Linda and Emma are my real family now. You're just excess baggage we've been carrying around. You have 1 hour to leave my house. As he turned to leave, Emma's smug voice piped up. I can finally have this room all to myself. I'm thinking pink walls, maybe a crystal chandelier. Linda joined in, already planning the renovation. We'll get you new furniture, sweetheart. Make the space truly yours. Something shifted inside me at that moment. A lifetime of being pushed aside, of swallowing my words, of trying to be smaller, it all fell away. I stood up straighter, my voice clear and strong. Actually, this isn't your house to renovate. They all turned to stare at me. What are you talking about? Linda snapped. With steady hands, I reached into my purse and pulled out the property documents Grandpa had given me. This house belongs to me. Grandma and Grandpa transferred ownership to me before they moved to Pine Grove. If anyone's leaving, it's you three. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad snatched the papers from my hands, his face growing pale as he read. This can't be legal, Linda stuttered. John, call your father right now. Dad's hands shook as he dialed Grandpa's number, putting it on speaker. Dad, what is the meaning of this? He demanded. Grandpa's voice was calm, almost amused. I see Chloe's finally told you about the house. How could you do this to us? Dad's voice cracked. How could we do this? Grandpa's voice turned hard. How could you do what you've done to Chloe all these years? We watched you turn from a loving father into a spineless man who lets his wife and spoiled daughter walk all over him and abuse your firstborn child. Yes, we gave the house to Chloe. We knew this day would come, when you'd finally show your true colors. Dad started to respond with something angry, but Grandpa cut him off. Choose your next words very carefully, son. One more disrespectful word, and you and your precious Emma lose your inheritance too. Your choice. I looked at the three shocked faces before me, my father, Linda, and Emma. They'd gone from righteous anger to stunned silence in the span of minutes. Now Linda was backpedaling fast. Chloe, sweetie, we were just upset about the fight. We didn't really mean any of it. Of course we don't want you to leave. We were just joking. Her voice had that sickly sweet tone she used when trying to manipulate situations. I have a really bad sense of humor, I replied, my voice steady. So I'm going to take everything you said at face value. You have 1 week to find a new place and move out. I'll be staying at a hostel this week while you pack. I don't trust myself to be around any of you right now. Chloe, please, Dad started, but I cut him off. 1 week. After that, I'm changing the locks. I walked out of my grandparents' house, no, my house, that night with my head held high, even as tears streamed down my face. The hostel bed was uncomfortable, but it was better than staying under the same roof with people who'd just shown me exactly who they were. True to my word, they were out within the week. On moving day, they made one last attempt at reconciliation. We're so sorry, Dad said, standing in the doorway with the last box. We realize now how horrible we've been. Linda nodded, frantically. We never meant for things to go this far. Even Emma managed to look somewhat contrite, though she said nothing. I stood silently, watching them leave. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. 3 months later, I sat in Grandpa and Grandma's room at Pine Grove, telling them everything that had happened since moving day. The afternoon sun streamed through the window as Grandma poured tea into delicate cups. She'd insisted on bringing her good china to the nursing home. "You did the right thing, standing up for yourself," Grandpa said, but his eyes were sad. "Though I hope someday you can all find a way to be family again." Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. "But only when you're ready, dear. And only if they've truly changed." I nodded, telling them about my decision to rent out the house while I finished college. The rental income helped cover my expenses, and I'd found a small apartment closer to campus. I'd even been able to replace my laptop with the first month's rent. "Dad called yesterday," I said quietly, stirring my tea. "They're living in some rundown apartment complex on the edge of town." He apologized again, said they're struggling. "And how do you feel about that?" Grandma asked gently. "Honestly? Part of me feels guilty, but another part thinks they needed to experience consequences for once." I set my cup down. I told him I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them, or if I even want to try. "That's fair," Grandpa said. "Some wounds take a long time to heal." I'm graduating next semester with my degree in graphic design. I've already had some promising interviews with local agencies, and my portfolio is getting stronger every day. Sometimes I drive by the house and see the young family who's renting it now, their kids playing in the yard, lights glowing warmly in the windows at dusk. Maybe someday I'll move back in. Maybe someday I'll even be ready to have a relationship with Dad, Linda, and Emma again. But for now, I'm focused on building my own life, one where I don't have to make myself smaller to make room for anyone else.